So good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. It's great to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us for this debate today, which is presented by the South African Debate Initiative. My name is Dave Gilchrist, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's debate. I would just remind each of you of our topic today, which is, does Isaiah 9 verse 6 affirm the deity of Jesus? I'm delighted to be introducing our four speakers. So let me start off with Dr. Shabir Ali. Dr. Shabir is the president of the Islamic Information and Dawah Center International and lives in Toronto, Canada. We then have Dr. Jonathan McClatchy, who is Christian writer, international speaker, scholar, debater, assistant professor, and fellow of the Discovery Institute. Jonathan lives in Boston. We also have Mr. Yusuf Ismail. Yusuf is a practicing attorney and public speaker, founder of the South African Debate Initiative, and based in Durban, South Africa. And we also have Reverend Samuel Green. Since 1999, Samuel has worked with the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Studies as a campus evangelist and Islamic engagement lawyer, and Samuel is based in Australia. So welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have each of you participating in this debate today. I would like to just remind each of us of our structure, just very quickly. Our structure today is that Jonathan and Shabir will present their opening statements for 20 minutes each. We will then have Samuel and Yusuf, who will have 12 minutes each. We will then have Jonathan and Shabir giving their rebuttals for 10 minutes each. And we will then have Samuel and Yusuf presenting for 5 minutes. We will then go into a cross-examination session with Shabir and Jonathan for 15 minutes each, followed by final statements from Samuel and Yusuf, which will be 3 minutes each. And then we will have closing statements from Jonathan and Shabir, which will be 5 minutes each. So I think we have a robust structure. We're looking forward to some really good discussions today. And so without further ado, I'm going to move into the opening statements. And I'm going to hand over to Jonathan and Shabir to give their opening statements of 20 minutes each. And Jonathan is going to be kicking us off. So Jonathan, over to yourself.
All right. Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. This is the first debate I've done with participants that are spread across 3 different continents. So it's an honor to participate in this debate with my esteemed colleagues, Shabir Ali, Yusuf Ismail, Samuel Green. This is my 4th debate involving Shabir, and my 5th involving Yusuf Ismail. And I've always found my interactions with both of those gentlemen to be very stimulating, and I look forward to an engaging discussion this evening as we look at this text in Isaiah 9, 6, and 7 that concerns the birth of Israel's Messiah, or so I will argue. So let me begin by reading the relevant verses that will be the focus of today's discussion. For to us a child is born, to us a son is governed, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. So in my opening statement, I will lay out the case that Isaiah 9:6 indeed affirms the divine status of Israel's Messiah. I will be defending 2 basic intentions. 1, Isaiah 9:6 is best understood as a text concerning the Messiah. And 2, Isaiah 9:6 identifies the Messiah as a divine person. Please bear in mind that given the time constraints for our discussion, I'm only able to sketch my case very briefly, and the points I will make could be fleshed out in much more detail. For those interested in a deeper dive into this text and its implications as to the deity of Israel's Messiah, I intend to publish an essay on my website, jonathanmcclatchy.com, in the next couple of days that will provide a much more detailed analysis. First, let's review some of the evidence that this text is indeed messianic in nature. Indeed, the messianic identity of the child described in Isaiah 9 can be determined by an analysis of intertextual links with other parts of the book of Isaiah. In Isaiah 11, 1 through 5, and verse 10, we read, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he shall judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. In that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. So this text is indisputably speaking of the Messiah, the descendant of David, and therefore of his father Jesse. This means that this text connects with our text in Isaiah 9, which speaks of a divine child reigning from David's throne. The conclusion that Isaiah 11 is speaking of the same individual as Isaiah 9 is further supported by the statement that with righteousness he will judge the needy, with justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth, which resembles what is said of the child born in Isaiah 9, verse 7, of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Thus, the Messiah spoken of in Isaiah 11 is the same individual as that spoken of in Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. The idea in both of those texts is that the Davidic dynasty, though it would fade away into obscurity, would one day bring forth a shoot from its stump or a root out of its dry ground. Indeed, the Hebrew used in Isaiah 11:10 for root, verse 1 uses the same word in the plural, is sheresh. The very word used of the suffering servant in Isaiah 53:2, for he grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. We can further confirm the connection between Isaiah 53 and 9 and 11 by looking at Isaiah 42, verses 2 through 7, which speaks of the same servant as that described in Isaiah 53, which reads, Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his teaching, the islands will put their hope. This is what God the Lord says, the creator of the heavens, who stretches them out, who spreads out the earth with all that springs from it, who gives breath to its people and life to those who walk on it. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand, and I will keep you, and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles, to open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. So thus, like the Messiah of Isaiah 9 and 11, the servant is going to bring justice to the nations in verse 1 and establish justice on the earth in verse 4. God also says, I will put my spirit on him. Compare with Isaiah 11, verse 2, the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. Moreover, the servant is going to open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. But that's exactly what we read of the divine child in Isaiah 9:1. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. He's also to be a light for the Gentiles, just as we saw in Isaiah 11, verse 10. In that day the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal for the peoples. Of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place should be glorious. Isaiah 9:2 similarly says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, in them as light shone. We also see these texts being connected to Isaiah 49, yet another messianic text, which says, listen to me, O coastlands, and give attention, you peoples from afar. The Lord called me from the womb, from the body of my mother he named my name. He made my mouth like a sharp sword, in the shadow of his hand he hid me. He made me a polished arrow, in his quiver he hid me away. And he said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified. But I said, I have labored in vain, I've spent my strength for nothing in vanity. Yet surely my right is with the Lord, and my recompense with my God. And now the Lord says, he who formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him, that Israel might be gathered to him. For I am honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God has become my strength. He says, it is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob, to bring back the preserved of Israel. I will make you as a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. Thus says the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel, and his Holy One, to one deeply despised, abhorred by the nation, the servant of rulers. Kings shall see and arise, princes, and they shall prostrate themselves, because of the Lord who is faithful, the Holy One of Israel, who has chosen you. So this text portrays the servant as the true Israel in verse 3, an individual who regathers and redeems national Israel, verse 5. The servant also, just as we saw in our other texts, is a light for the Gentiles in verse 6. There's also a striking parallel in verse 7 to Isaiah 52:15. Isaiah 52:15 says that he shall sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. for that which has not been told them they see, and that which they've not heard they understand. Notice also that the servant in Isaiah 52:15 sprinkles the nations, which is consistent with the mission statement assigned to the servant in Isaiah 9, 11, 42, and 49. This, among other clues, indicates that the suffering servant of Isaiah 53 is the same individual as is spoken of in these other texts in Isaiah, including chapter 9. The messianic identity of the child described in Isaiah 9 is further supported by comparison with Zechariah 9, 9 through 12, which is unequivocally messianic, as even the great Jewish medieval commentator Rashi states with regard to this text, quote, "It is impossible to interpret this except as referring to King Messiah, as it is stated, and his rule should be from sea to sea. We do not find that Israel had such a ruler during the days of the Second Temple," end quote. If then it can be shown to be probable that Isaiah 9 and Zechariah 9, 9 through 12 speak of one and the same individual, this would supply yet further evidence for identifying the child with the Messiah. In this text, Zechariah prophesies, quote, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. And the battle bow should be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. His rule should be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. Today I declare that I will restore to you double." So the individual of whom Zechariah speaks in this passage is clearly the same individual of whom Isaiah spoke. Notice the close parallels. Just as we read of the servant in Isaiah, this individual establishes worldwide justice and peace on the earth, and his rule extends from shore to shore, including to the Gentiles. So having established then that Isaiah 9:6 concerns the Messiah, we now turn our attention to the question of whether it affirms his deity. As we've seen, Isaiah 9:6 confers upon the Messiah a fourfold title: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The most provocative of those titles is Mighty God. And at first consideration, one might think that this ends the debate. However, Orthodox Jewish interpreters often point out that the title God can be used in some contexts of those who are not God. For example, in Exodus 7:1, God says to Moses, "See, I have made you God," or Elohim, to Pharaoh. Psalm 8:5 also uses the word Elohim in reference to angels or heavenly beings. In Isaiah 9:6, the complete phrase that is used is El Gabor. The expression occurs 3 other times in the Hebrew biblical corpus, and in all 3 of those cases, it refers specifically to Yahweh. One of those references is, in fact, the very next chapter that follows our text. "A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God." This tends to favor an interpretation of the same expression in Isaiah 9:6, as likewise denoting divine status. It's also noteworthy that the word El occurs in the singular form 217 times in the biblical text, and always, without exception, denotes nothing less than absolute deity, though there's a handful of instances where it is used to refer to false gods, in Deuteronomy 32:12 and Psalm 44:20 and so forth. Thus, if Isaiah 9:6 does not use the word El to denote divine status, it would be the sole exception. The child is also identified by the title Everlasting Father, which may be translated as a genitive phrase, Father of Eternity, since Abi in the Hebrew text stands in the genitive relationship to Ad. Hans Wilderberger actually concurs with this rendering. He says that it can only mean Father of Eternity. This translation implies that the child is in fact the creator himself, which is unequivocally an attribute of deity. Radleneck and Spencer note that, quote, "The child born here is not to be confused with the Father in the triune Godhead. Rather, the Son of God is the creator of time, the author of eternity," end quote. Walter Kaiser likewise comments, "Thus, the one who will arrive later is one who has been here from the beginning of time and more." Another title that's ascribed to the child is Wonderful Counselor, literally Wonder Counselor. Though admittedly less conclusive than the titles already surveyed, I believe that this phrase is also suggestive of the child's divine identity. Indeed, Isaiah says of God elsewhere, this also comes from the Lord of hosts. He is wonderful in counsel and excellent in wisdom. Isaiah 28, verse 29. Alec Mottier, in his commentary on the book of Isaiah, concludes concerning this text, quote, "To designate the child as Pele makes him out of the ordinary, one who is something of a miracle. Isaiah's use of the noun in Isaiah 25:1 and the verb in 28:29 of the Lord's counsel suggests that he would not resist the notion of deity in Isaiah 9:6, specifically when it is contextually linked with mighty God or El Gabor. Now, some scholars have argued that the expression El Gabor could be translated along the lines of mighty warrior, which takes El in an adjectival sense rather than as a noun. However, as Alec Mortier shows in his commentary on the book of Isaiah, when the word El appears in combination with an adjective like Gabor, it always retains its full status as a noun. And so I would reject that particular interpretation that's sometimes offered of that text. And we can talk in more detail about some of those alternative arguments to this interpretation in due course. Something else here. It may also be noted that the Targum of Jonathan ben Uziel, which is an Aramaic paraphrase of the Hebrew Bible, actually explicitly identifies this text as speaking of the Messiah. It says, the prophet said to the house of David, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and he has taken the law upon himself to keep it. His name is called from before him who is wonderful in counsel, the mighty God who lives to eternity, the Messiah, whose peace shall be great upon us in his days." Now, Tobias Singer, who's a Jewish scholar, so he alleges that to further conceal the Isaiah 9:6 is referring to names given to Hezekiah, the New International Version Bible completely deletes the word name, causing the verse to read, "and he will be called." Now, this, I think, is an incredibly weak point, since to say that someone will be called by a name can be non-literal and need not denote a birth name. In fact, Tobias Singer himself points out that Jeremiah 33:16, speaking of the city of Jerusalem, asserts that, "and this is the name of which you will be called, it will be called, the Lord is our righteousness." And Hezekiah was certainly not conferred those names by his mother. What about the interpretation that this is speaking about King Hezekiah? Well, so Tobias Singer says, in an effort to portray Isaiah 9:6 as a future prophecy about a divine Jesus, Christian Bibles crudely mistranslated this passage. The verse is not discussing any future event or the Messiah. Rather, Isaiah is describing the exaltation of King Hezekiah and the divine names bestowed upon him following the miracle when Jerusalem was saved from the Assyrian siege 2,700 years ago. Read this passage in the original Hebrew for yourself. The King James Version, the NES, and a host of other Christian Bibles meticulously changed all the past tense verbs in this verse into a future tense, so it would appear to be foretelling of the event in the distant future, end quote. But the use of the perfect tense in Isaiah 9:6 may be plausibly understood as utilizing the Hebrew idiom of the prophetic perfect, where a future event is so assured that it's spoken of as though it were already completed. Other examples of the prophetic perfect in Isaiah 5:13, where Isaiah speaks of the future captivity of Judah as though it already transpired. Or another example is Isaiah 10:28-32, or Isaiah 53 even contains the prophetic perfect, or Amos 5:2. Now, is this text referring to King Hezekiah, as Tobias Singer and other Jewish apologists suggest? Well, let me give a few examples of shortcomings that I think exist for this interpretation. For one thing, Hezekiah's son, Manasseh, was a wicked and idolatrous king who reversed his father's reforms and restored polytheistic worship in the temple of Baal and Asherah. He even apparently participated in the cult of Molech, sacrificing children as offerings. In fact, within just 4 generations, the nation was exiled to Babylon, which conflicts with Isaiah's statements that of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore, in Isaiah 9:7. Now, the medieval scholar Isaac Troche attempts to evade this conclusion by claiming that the words "without end" are a mere figure of speech, and that he says that we find similarly in Isaiah 2:7, his land was full of silver and gold, and there was no end to his treasures, and his land was full of horses, and there was no end to his chariots. Thus we also find in Ecclesiastes 4:8, there is one and no second, and he has neither son nor brother, and there is no end to all his troubles, end quote. Trotsky also interprets the phrase, quote, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore, to mean, quote, that his dominion, that is the dynasty of David, will never perish. And though an interpretation occurred during the time of the captivity, the government nonetheless will, in the days of the Messiah, return to the scion of David, end quote. However, as Michael Brown notes in response to Trotsky, quote, it is clear from the examples he cites that these words refer to something that can hardly be counted or measured because it is so vast and boundless, like the riches of Solomon or the troubles of an afflicted man. How can this prophecy that states of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end apply to Hezekiah, even granting that the words without end do not have to be taken literally in terms of an eternal kingdom, though this would be a perfectly good way of expressing that concept in Hebrew? They simply do not describe Hezekiah's reign, which was quite limited in international scope and influence, end quote. Brown also asks regarding Trotsky's suggestion that this text need not refer to an uninterrupted reign, how could Isaiah have been more clear? Is there no significance to the words from that time on and forevermore? So in summary then, we have seen that the identity of the child of whom Isaiah speaks is none other than the Messiah, and that the messianic figure is a divine human person. So thank you for your attention, and I'll close with that and turn over to Shabir.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for your opening statement. Shabir, we'll move across to you for your opening statement for 20 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. And I would like to share a screen. So let me see how I can do that, because I've only done this once before, and I hope that I am able to do it right. So share screen, and I don't see the screen that I want to share available. Oh, here it is. So share this one.
Great.
And I need to start this as a slideshow from the beginning. So did you all see that? It says, does Isaiah 9 affirm the deity of Christ?
We can see that.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, then I also want to get my timer up. Okay, hopefully I'll work with this. Okay, let me begin by praising our Creator and Fashioner, the Creator of the heavens and the earth. I thank you, God, for giving us this opportunity to meet together in such a cordial atmosphere. And I pray that you will grant us the opportunity to learn more and to come to a better understanding of each other as Muslims and Christians, and that we will be guided to that truth that you want us to accept for our salvation in the life hereafter. I begin, as always, by praising our Creator and Fashioner, asking him to send peace and blessings upon all of his prophets and messengers. May God bless us all here in this meeting, and bless all of those in the audience from around the globe. Indeed, I'm pleased to be in this dialogue, especially with persons from around the globe. Samuel all the way from down in Australia, Dave from South Africa, and so too Yusuf Ismail. Dave has brought back memories of my visit to South Africa in 2009 when I had debates with his dad, who is a very pleasant, nice individual, and I still have a book that he gifted me on that occasion. Thank you, Jonathan, for that excellent presentation, and I will engage with some of the specifics in the rebuttal period. But for the moment, I want to make an opening presentation of my own. So here is my presentation, which I'm sharing with you. Does Isaiah 9 affirm the deity of Christ? Assessing the evidence. I give you my conclusion in advance. Two conclusions. A, Isaiah 9 is concerned with a present king. To interpret this as a reference to a future king depends on an assumption other than grammatical and contextual considerations. But a Muslim can grant that a future leader is meant on the assumption that one, God revealed this to Isaiah, or two, God guided Isaiah to put the matter that way. So that's not really the matter of contention for me, but comes my second conclusion, which is that Isaiah 9b, Isaiah 9:6 does not affirm the literal deity of the king that is spoken about. So let me unpack these two conclusions by observing that there are two basic approaches to interpreting Isaiah. One is a Christological approach. The other one is a contextual approach. Let's see how these pan out. So the Christological approach, in my humble judgment, starts with the belief that Christ is the fulfillment of Isaiah. And then we go to interpret Isaiah in a way that points to Christ. To me, this is circular. The other alternative is the contextual approach, which starts with we start as neutral as possible. Then we study the grammar. We study each passage of the text as it relates to the structure of the whole text. We study the history. We ask, when was the text written? What was happening before and at the time when the text was written? Then we conclude whether or not Isaiah is Christological. So to unpack this further, let's look at the grammar of Isaiah 6, since I want to follow that contextual approach. So what about the grammar? I want to compare two translations with you. First, a Christian translation, and second, a Jewish translation. Now we look at the Christian translation. Typical is the New American Standard Bible in this regard, where it says, a child will be born to us, and so on. So you see that everything is in the future sense, the future tense. The son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Now, as Jonathan pointed out in his opening presentation, this is not an impossible rendering, because it could be a prophetic perfect. The prophet is speaking of the future as if it's already a done deal, and so he's using the perfect tense that we associate with our English past tense. However, in terms of grammar, literally, it is perfect. And we have to, first of all, assume that he is speaking about the future in order to render it future. And that involves circular reasoning, the Christological type of interpretation that I pointed to previously. I want to share with you a Jewish translation. And I say a Jewish translation because Jews may choose a translation which does not reflect some of the aspects of this that I present before you. But this is an interesting one from Chabad.org, where we read, for a child has been born to us, a son given to us, and the authority is upon his shoulder, and the wondrous advisor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, called his name the Prince of Peace. Now, the two issues here to be observed. One is that the whole thing is given in the past tense. So this child has already been born, and his name has already been called, whatever it was called. And the second thing is that it is the everlasting Father that calls the child the Prince of Peace. And the same everlasting Father is called the mighty God and the wondrous advisor. How do we get to that? Let's look at the differences more clearly. So on the left, the Christian translation, at the bottom, the bullet point says that the one who gives the name to the Son is not named. And that indeed, you can see, he is called, or his name will be called, but we're not told who is calling the name. Now, look at the right. The last bullet point says that the mighty God, the everlasting Father, is the one who gives the name to the Son. Is that grammatically even possible? We'll see. On the left, last bullet point, the Son's name is Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, in the Christian translation. In this unique Jewish translation, and the last bullet point, we note that the Son's name is merely Prince of Peace. So now, how is this explained grammatically? Rabbi Tovia Singer explained this in several YouTube videos, actually. And this is supported by Rabbi Michael Skobach as well in another video that is easily found on YouTube. So what they're saying is that a Hebrew sentence can have the order verb, subject, and then object. So the subject of the verb can come after the verb, quite unlike English. Though on rare occasions we use it in English as well. We use this type of order for a certain emphasis. A Hebrew sentence then, in Isaiah 9:6, in the Hebrew sentence, the verb to call may be followed by the subject who calls, that is the mighty God, etc., who is doing the calling and calling this son by the name Prince of Peace. Now,
just a quick question. Your slides are not moving, so I'm just concerned that we're not seeing you going through your slides. So sorry to interrupt you, but I don't want us to lose your slide.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Dave. I don't know.
Then you go to slideshow, Dr. Shabir. You go to slideshow, and then
Yes.
you click start from the beginning. But you go to slideshow on the top
Yes,
of your bar.
I did that, and I did start from the beginning.
So the reason is that Shabir is sharing the PowerPoint rather than the presentation mode. So if you unshare and then reshare, except sharing your presentation.
Okay, let me stop share, and then
if it's already in presentation mode, and then share the presentation rather than the PowerPoint app.
Okay, so I shouldn't do a PowerPoint presentation then. I shouldn't go slideshow from the beginning, is what you're saying, Jonathan?
You should, so you should go slideshow and then share, but share the slideshow rather than the application.
I see. So I start.
You open the whole thing,
yeah. But when I do that, when I do start the slideshow, then it fills up the entire screen. I can no longer see the controls for our StreamYard room.
Yeah, I think what happens then, Dr. Shabir, is you click escape when you want to go back. So until your slideshow finishes, once the slideshow finishes, I think you just press the escape button on your laptop, and then it will kind of reduce the size and content. Alternatively, you just simply have it in the way you do it, and then you move it individually down. But
Shabir, I'm pretty sure you just click on the minimize dash in the top right-hand corner.
Okay.
Just try that.
Okay. Yeah. Let me see this.
So start your slideshow and then click on the top right-hand dash to minimize it.
Yeah, to minimize it. So you just start the slideshow and share it.
Top right-hand dash. I don't even see that. Once I click start slideshow, it just fills up the entire screen.
The easiest way, I think, to do this is to start your show and then go Alt Tab and switch back to this window and then share screen.
Alt Tab. Okay. All right. Let me do that then. Let me try that. Slideshow from the beginning, and we go Alt Tab. Yes. Okay. That's a helpful hint. Thank you, Jonathan. That solves my issue. But I have to do them both at the same time and go here. No. Sorry. So I go share. Screen. Oh, I could have shared slides too, but I have no slides here. I should have put it in Google and then Google Slides and then share it from there. I can share it from my computer. No. Okay. Let me share screen and see if that works. Share screen. So I'm going to share that screen. How about now? Can you see my?
We should.
Oh yeah, you could. I see it's in the window within our, and then I can enlarge it that way.
You can do it that way.
Yeah.
Yes,
How about if I go slideshow from the beginning? What happens there?
We don't see it.
You don't see it.
It's not sharing that window. That's the only thing.
I see. Okay. All right.
But so I think what you can do is then you just go manually down.
I'll just go manually down there. Okay. Okay, fantastic. So then I'll let me try one more time. Share screen, and that's the screen that I want to share. And then it's in there. Okay.
I think just close that box. Yeah. Okay. And I think you go on your left. You go on the left side. I think the right side. Yeah. And then that'll be fine. And then on the right side of your screen, you basically just go down onto the next page.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now, can you all see it?
Yeah, but you'll have to go to the next slide. Yeah, we can all see it clearly.
I can see it. Okay, good. Dave, how much time do I have left?
So you have another 12 minutes, Shabir.
12 minutes, okay. So let me be quick then. I will go past the slides which I've already described.
Yes, we can see those slides now.
Okay, fantastic. I have to go back to where I left off. So I've already done this. and I talked about the Christian and Jewish translation, and now verb and subject. Okay, so now, is the king literally called mighty God? Let's look at that. As clarified by John Collins in his book, King and Messiah, a Son of God, page 47, the Bible went through revisions. During the Babylonian exile, monotheism was championed, but some Bible passages were left unrevised in this respect. Thus, some passages reflect a remnant of the old beliefs, which we will see has some accommodation for calling a king in a divine way. So in the ancient world, he points out, kings were regarded as divine in some sense. Hence, it was natural for Isaiah 9:6 to call the king mighty God. Of course, in an attenuated manner. Several sources, we're asking now, is the king metaphorically called mighty God? Several sources identify the son of Isaiah 9:6 as a king at the time, probably Hezekiah. We find this, for example, in HarperCollins Study Bible, the New Jerome Biblical Commentary. Now, there are verses, of course, that call people God, as Jonathan has pointed out so well in his opening presentation. And there is a curious verse in Ezekiel, chapter 32, verse 21, where the term El Gibor is used in the plural. So if you look at the line that begins with the number 410, which is Strong's number for El, and we have it LA here, the plural, and Giborim, which is Gibor in the plural. So this is translated in this particular passage as the strong among the mighty. But if we insist on translating El Gibor as mighty God, in this passage, El Gibor should mean mighty gods. And this would refer to people on the ground. And so we cannot insist on a literal translation unless we want to be consistent and call people gods. But we can go for a metaphorical translation. Support for a metaphorical translation is found according to the biblicalunitarian.com website. Both Martin Luther and James Moffat translated divine hero. The Oxford Bible Commentary has it God. It says God here may be a superlative, in which case it means divine warrior. Interpreter's one-volume commentary on the Bible says a divine, and then they put in brackets, i.e., hero, warrior. The New Jerome Biblical Commentary says God here is used in an attenuated sense, so it's not in the full sense of deity. Now, I want to spend a few minutes to look at the textual and historical context. In terms of the textual context, there are major sections that have been identified in Isaiah. I want to look at Nelson's complete book of Bible maps and charts on page 282, where we find that the book of Isaiah has three major sections. There are prophecies of condemnation up to chapter 35, and then a historical parenthesis or interlude up to chapter 39, and then prophecies of comfort and consolation up to the end. Let's see how that plays out. So we have the three sections here. Notice the historical parenthesis. This is very important for my point here. And you see that historical parenthesis occurs from the beginning of chapter 36, just ending before chapter 40. So 36, 37, 38, 39, 4 chapters. Now, is that 4 chapter 36, 37, 38, 39? Yes. Okay. And so you notice that the historical parenthesis is about Hezekiah's salvation, sickness, and sin. So this author is very much concerned with the history, and in particular with Hezekiah's part in this entire history. I'll skip over the rest of this for the lack of time. Now, the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible has Isaiah begin like this: in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, and so on. You can see that the author of Isaiah is very much concerned with the history of King Hezekiah and what's happening in that period of time. So to interpret Isaiah within context, we have to see how the whole book fits together and also how it fits within that history. It's very much concerned with the history. It's hardly about a futuristic person who will live some 700 years later. Now let's look at what was happening at the time here. We see from in this map from Nelson's book of maps and charts that's towards the right, that would be the far east from this limited perspective. We have Babylon, who, it's the Babylonian king that would eventually destroy the temple and take the Israel, the people of Judah into exile. But before that, Assyria in the north will wreak havoc on the northern kingdom, which is called Israel here in this chart. So closer to the Mediterranean, you see Israel above and Judah below. This is curiously, the northern tribes are referred to as Israel, and the southern tribes, which were only Judah and Benjamin, and some of Levi, they are referred to as Judah. This was the threat that was facing King Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, and that has a lot to do with the prophecies in Isaiah chapter 7, especially verse 14. And it's curious that Jonathan did not bring up Isaiah 7 in his opening presentation when he wanted to show the continuation between Isaiah 9 and 11. But many think that the one who was spoken about in Isaiah 7 is the same as the one who was in Isaiah 9. And I think from Jonathan's point of view, it has to be the same, because if one is called Emmanuel in Isaiah 7 and the other one is called Mighty God in Isaiah 9, they better be the one and the same. Otherwise, you would have two incarnations of a divine being. But leaving that question aside, the point is that I want to make here is that the passages are very much concerned with the immediate context of war and the threatened decimation of the Israelites in the north and the Judaites in the south. And so we find the last verse of that historic section, which we will see is classified as Isaiah, the first book of Isaiah. We find that Isaiah says to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Days are coming when all that is in your house and all that which your ancestors have stored up until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. Some of your own sons who are born to you shall be taken away. They shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good," for he thought, "There will be peace and security in my days." And so ends that historical section and ends the first book of Isaiah. Now, of course, we know Isaiah to be only one book today, but we'll come to that, how academics divide the book. Now, looking at this threat that was facing Ahaz and later on his son Hezekiah, we see a closer look at Israel and Judah. So we still have Israel in the north, with the pink border, and Judah slightly below that with the yellowish border. And we have Damascus towards the top right. Damascus is within the larger area called Aram, and that's also called Syria. So this is the threat from the king of that region that was trying to attack Israel in the north, and Israel wanted to, rather the Assyrians were threatening the Israelites in the north. Israel and Aram together wanted the support of Judah, and Ahaz was refusing support. Rather, Ahaz aligned himself with the king of Assyria. And this was seen as a sellout, and these northern tribes started to attack Judah in the south. So it's in this moment of distress that the salvation is promised. It's not a future salvation to come 700 years later, but it was about the birth of a child in Isaiah 7 that will help, that will be a sign that this will be taken care of by God within something like a few years. And this is continued into Isaiah 9 with a similar promise, whether of the same son or a different son to be born, who will now take on the leadership, and that probably is Hezekiah, who does eventually take on the leadership from his father. So looking at I think I looked at this already, so I'm going to skip this one. Now let's look at when Isaiah prophesied. We look at this chart in the middle of the page, and there's some surrounding text which I should have removed. from another presentation that I did, but please ignore that. Look at the chart showing when Isaiah prophesied, and we see that the dates are given spanning the Assyrian invasion in 701 BC and Hezekiah's reign ending in 689 BC. So it's concerned with that period of time, and whatever is promised, it's not going to stretch all the way to Jesus being born approximately 4 BC, some 700 years later. It was immediate. Now, the academics divide the text into first Isaiah, second Isaiah, third Isaiah, and so on. We don't have enough time to deal with this in great detail, but what we will notice is that the second Isaiah is distinguished for its emphasis on monotheism, especially in chapters 43 to 46. And what that implies for our present topic is that in first Isaiah, we see that the king is called Mighty God. But in the second Isaiah, that glorious figure that we're talking about is called the servant of God, especially in Isaiah 42 and others. And of course, Jonathan referred to that servant of God passage from Isaiah 42. So you see two different presentations, and it's obvious that there is an evolution of thought, and we're heading closer to monotheism in the second book of Isaiah, but something remains of that polytheistic environment from the ancient world in first Isaiah, especially in 9:6, if we take that literally, but we don't have to. We can take it metaphorically. So I conclude where I began by saying, Isaiah 9:6 is concerned with the present king. We can allow that it is prophetic, but that is with an assumption that is not there in the text. It could be a Muslim and Christian assumption based on our belief in God and how God motivates and inspires prophets. But my conclusion B is the most important, that Isaiah 6 does not affirm the literal deity of the king or the Messiah or that futuristic figure. I thank you all for listening, and I hope that's within time, Dave.
Dr. Shabir, that's definitely within time. Thank you very much for your opening statement. We are now going to move into Samuel and then Yusuf, who are going to be giving us each 12 minutes. I think Samuel has a presentation, so Samuel will let you pull up your presentation. Let me just remove Shabir's presentation, and we'll pull yours up.
I can stop sharing here. There.
Yeah, no problem. I think we've got Samuel, your slides are now on screen and ready to go.
Okay. Well, it's great to be with everyone today. Thank you, Shabir, for that presentation. And it's great that we can come together and discuss the details. This is a fairly technical debate in one sense, looking at very specific details. And so it's helpful to do that. Sometimes we have to do that. So thank you, gentlemen, for coming together. And I hope that this is helpful for people. I just want to read the verses again. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Now, what I want to do today is to look at this verse in its wider context. Jonathan was particularly looking at some of the words in detail. I don't want to look at so much the words of the particular verses in detail, but to set them in the context of the rest of the Bible in ways that others have done already. So I'm just going to move on to my first slide here. And I want to begin by talking about God's mission for humanity, Israel, and the Messiah. And my first point is, who are we as humanity? And the Bible answers that by saying in the very first chapter that we are made in the image of God and that we are meant to bring glory to God. But you don't have to read very far to see that we fail to bring glory to God. Okay? This is the biblical story. We fail to bring glory to God. And as you read through the stories of Noah and as you keep going through the Bible, everyone fails. Now, in this world where everyone has turned away from God and we fail to bring glory to God in the way that we were created, God makes a new nation. He chooses the man Abraham, and through Abraham chooses a particular son and makes the nation of Israel. Now, who is Israel? Israel is the firstborn son of God. So we've got here, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. And Israel has a particular mission. God says to Israel, now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession, though the whole earth is mine. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So in this sinful world, Israel is going to have a unique role as a priestly nation. And we see that when we read the stories of the Old Testament, how Israel is this priestly nation. It's the voice of God to the other nations around it. And it's important that they just live according to God's ways and display him. In many ways, they take over the image mantle, and they are meant to represent God in the world. And so you'll have verses like, be holy because I am holy, spoken to Israel. We read this in the Psalms. He has revealed his word to Jacob, his laws and decrees to Israel. He has done this for no other nation. They do not know his laws. Praise the Lord. Israel has this unique role. But when we read the history of Israel, we see that they failed to bring God glory too. So humanity has failed, and now the nation of Israel has failed. What we see is that as we start to learn about the Messiah in Israel's history, we see that what was being spoken about of the nation of Israel is now carried by the Messiah himself. There's something called the Davidic covenant. And this is where God says to King David that David's son will be God's son and God will be his father. This is in 2 Samuel 7. And so under the Davidic covenant, the Messiah now is called the Son of God. And as you read the books of Kings and Chronicles and the prophets, it's what the Messiah does that is now the focus. What the nation does is, of course, important, but the history and the future is going to be worked out on what the king does. And the king is now the son who represents the nation and does things on behalf of the nation. And we see this in the book of Chronicles and Kings, where the king, Hezekiah, can turn aside the wrath of God. If Hezekiah repents, if Hezekiah offers up the Passover sacrifice, the wrath of God is turned away from the people of God. And so we see this throughout the books of Kings and Chronicles, how the Messiah, the messianic figure of the son of David, because that's what the Messiah is. He's the son of David from that covenant. He's the anointed king. The one anointed means the Messiah. He is the one on whom we are now watching. And so Chronicles being the last book written, it finishes a whole book on the king of Israel and watching and what type of king we're meant to be looking for. But what we see when we look at Israel's history is that they fail to bring God glory too. And then that brings us to the book of Isaiah, because in Isaiah 9 verse 6, we get the ideal king. So whether or not this is Hezekiah or not, and I think it's both Hezekiah and we will see it's beyond him because he doesn't fulfill it. We see the ideal, because in Isaiah 9 verse 6 and 7, and in the other chapters which Jonathan pointed out in Isaiah, we meet the ideal Messiah, the Messiah who actually is going to do what humanity, Israel, and the Messiah have failed to do. Now, we've been speaking about Hezekiah a bit already, and I think that's a valid thing to do. And I really appreciated your structure, the structure that you put up, Shabir, of the book of Isaiah. Those types of things are really helpful, particularly for big books, for people to hold it together in their mind. You have those prophecies put forward, and then you get chapters 36 to 39 with Hezekiah being portrayed there. And what you see is that, yes, he is glorious. Yes, God is faithful and keeps his promise. But in the end, Hezekiah does not turn aside the Babylonian wrath. he actually says, and there are two things in that story where Hezekiah sins and is rebuked by Isaiah and told to get his house in order. He does it and he says, well, at least I'm going to have peace in my own time. Now, the nation of Israel was God's chosen nation. If you read the book of Chronicles and the books of the prophets in the Old Testament, it's spoken of as the kingdom of God on earth. It is God's kingdom on earth. And so when Jesus comes talking about the kingdom of God is coming, he's talking about how the kingdom of God's going to come out of Israel again. And so what we have here is Hezekiah does not bring the kingdom of God. Isaiah 36 to 39 shows us God's faithfulness and how Hezekiah is a great king and is a model in some sense of what a Messiah should do. But in the end, he sins and he cannot turn aside the wrath of God, and he doesn't establish the kingdom as it is spelt out in Isaiah 9, because in Isaiah 9, it's an everlasting kingdom. It's an everlasting kingdom. That's what it is. And that goes right back to the expectation of the covenants that God made with King David, that David would have a son who would rule forever. And so the idea of a son ruling forever begins with God's covenant with David. It goes through the Psalms. It's in Isaiah. It's in Jeremiah. It's in Ezekiel. It's in the prophets. The idea that there will be a messianic king who will do it forever. And the story of Hezekiah shows us that, yes, he is an important king, but he's not that king. And so you have to keep waiting. That's just how the book of Isaiah unfolds. It gives the prophecy, and then it begins to show the character and what the fulfillment's going to look like and what it's not going to look like. Now, what we see here, I've only got 3 minutes left, is that there's this theme in Isaiah. I've got this from Isaiah 59 and 63, where it talks about God just saying straight that humanity fails to do what it's supposed to do. He, God, saw that there was no one. He was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So his own arm worked salvation for him. His own righteousness sustained him. I looked and there was no one to help. I was appalled that no one gave support. So my own arm worked salvation for me. My own wrath sustained me. So the point here is that humans do not fulfill their God-given role, be it Israel, be it humanity, be it the Messiah, be it Hezekiah. We all fail in that role. And so to this, God says, well, I'm going to do it. He says it again and again, that God is going to do what we have failed to do. Now, we see this in various places. The Lord laid bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and the end of the earth will see the salvation of our God. A voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. The thrust of Isaiah is humanity has failed in its mission. We all have, whether Israel or not, and God is going to come and fulfill our mission. God is going to come and bring glory for himself. And all of the Gospels begin with Isaiah 40, saying that it's the Lord coming to bring glory to himself. And so I think that's my last slide. Let me just check. Yes, it is. So you can phase me out there, David. So I just want to give the bigger picture there, that Isaiah 9, it may well be speaking about Hezekiah, and I'll leave that up for others to discuss. But I'm saying even if it does, the failure of Hezekiah in 36 to 39 shows that he doesn't live up to it. That was his mission. That's what he was meant to do. And so we're still waiting for it. And when we read the rest of Isaiah, God declares, in view of humanity's sinfulness, I am going to come and do it myself. And so in the end, God is going to come and be that true king. God will come and perfect the nation of Israel. God will bring glory himself through Israel. And that seems to me to be the big thrust of Isaiah, and how it's talking about how God is going to be the one who's going to fulfill Isaiah 9. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Samuel. Right on time. We're now going to move into Yusuf having 12 minutes to respond. So Yusuf, over to yourself.
Okay, let me just start here. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Dr. Shabir. It's been, fantastic listening to you fine gentlemen here. I learned quite a bit, and I think we're all learning. And so I'm privileged to be in fine company. Thank you once again, Dave, for agreeing to moderate the session. And those viewers out there, it is 3:00 here in South Africa, so I'm a bit rusty, but let's just see how well we go through this discussion. We're discussing Isaiah 9, chapter 5, verse 6. For unto us a child is born, a son has been given to us, the government is upon his shoulder. I'm not going to go through the entire passage, but who is the child that the prophet basically speaks about? Now, I don't know if you have seen it, but I know Jonathan has alluded to, and even Dr. Shabir alluded to Rabbi Tovia Singer. I was in a discussion with Rabbi Tovia about a few weeks back where we kind of unpacked this. And he, in fact, informed me, which was quite a surprise to me back then, that the Greek Septuagint does not contain this particular passage. I didn't know that. And so the question I want to ask is, why not? Why is it that the Greek Septuagint, that is viewed as authoritative, does not contain Isaiah 9:6? The second point is that many rabbis, not just him, view this, at least the translation as is presented in many of the Christian Bibles, the New American Standard Version, the NIV, the KJV, the RSV, as one of the most corrupted texts in the Christian Bible translation. And we're going to unpack that, because the outset is that there are many passages in the Old Testament that are now seized Christologically, and by missionaries, by probably even conventional conservative Christian scholars. And the point being made is that if the writers of the New Testament had assumed some degree of reference to Christ in this particular passage, which now Samuel is conceding that this could be a reference to Hezekiah. But if indeed it was an assumed reference to Christ, then they would have seized it completely. Yet you look at the length and breadth of the New Testament, the four Gospels, the writings of Paul, the epistles of John, whoever wrote them, none of them, in fact, seize upon this particular passage. And so what happens is that many missionaries, in my opinion, engage in what could clearly be seen as eisegesis, as opposed to exegesis. In other words, you've got a preconceived idea, you've got a conclusion, and then, of course, you superimpose that conclusion on the particular verse, and then, of course, it's like kind of reading your theology into the text itself. Now, I know my time is limited, but I just want to point out two things which I think Dr. Shabir, and I believe Jonathan also alluded to us, the fact that if you look at this particular passage itself, there are two key words. So one word which has been translated as "for unto us a child is born." The word is Yeled Yulad. Now, if you look at various passages in the Old Testament, Yulad is referring to was born. Then there's another aspect here, which is that he shall be called. His name shall be called. Or as the NIV, they leave out the word his name. The word in Hebrew, as I understand, is Waikra. And Waikra, again, is also in the past tense, was called. Now, I know, again, Jonathan suggests that you can use the prophetic past to use, or the prophetic present to indicate the future, which is of course possible, but there needs to be some degree of exegetical basis for that. What's the exegetical precedent? What's the theological precedent for taking this particular approach in relation to this particular verse? What's the justification? And so in a sense, what many Jewish scholars point out, and Tovia Singer is one amongst many, and in my discussion I had with him a few weeks ago, what he points out is that it's a crudely translated passage. That verse is not discussing a future event. What Isaiah is doing, as Shabir has indicated, as Samuel has somewhat conceded, describing the exaltation of King Hezekiah and the divine name bestowed upon him following the miracle when Jerusalem was in fact saved from the Assyrian siege about 2,700 years ago, 3,000 years ago. So it then appears to me that, because of the lack of reading of Hebrew, and many Christians, in fact, many missionaries, I'm not so sure about you gentlemen, you probably may know, but many missionaries rely on English translation, and a host of the English Christian Bibles, what they do is that they change the past tense verbs into a future tense. I mean, you can make the argument that the past tense could probably indicate the future, but what you see is most of these translations deliberately put it in the future tense, so it would appear to be foretelling an event in the future. And there are many Hebrew verbs similar to what is contained in Isaiah 9:6, in other places in the Old Testament, in other places in the Tanakh, where the same identical verses, words, and phrases in Hebrew appear. They are rendered in their correcting in the correct mannerism. You, for example, look at Leviticus 1:1, Isaiah 21:8, Isaiah 36:13. The word Waikra, always rendered in the past tense, was called. Or, the word Yulad, Genesis 4:26, again, the word Yulad, and to Seth there was born. Or in Genesis 10:21, the word Yulad, the children were born. Genesis 35:26, these are the sons of Jacob which were born, Yulad. I mean, that's in the past tense. So if it is indeed in the past tense, it's quite clear it is in the past tense, it appears to be that there is a deliberate agenda here when the actual passage is in fact rendered in this particular instance in the future sense. And the aim is that the translator, in a general sense, wants to prove a particular theological point. The other point is that Jesus is never ever called the everlasting Father anywhere in the scripture. In fact, to deem Jesus, if this is a reference to Jesus, and he shall be called everlasting Father, where was Jesus called everlasting Father? And if we are to concede that Jesus is everlasting Father, then that in itself would be a form of modalism. I mean, Christian Trinitarians would obviously deny that he's the everlasting Father. Jesus, the Father, and the Son, they're not the same. They're distinct. They're two distinct persons. So, it's a basic tenet of Trinitarian doctrine that Christians, you should neither confound the persons nor divide the substance, as is contained in the Athanasian Creed. And yet, if you use this particular passage to apply it, and of course apply to Jesus, and if the verse is properly translated, then Trinitarian Christians would have a fundamental problem. One, you'd have the problem of modalism, and two, I mean, you'd be committing heresy, because you are now saying, well, look, Jesus is now the everlasting Father. The other point is this: is that I've seen, for example, Anthony Buzzard, and I've seen many other Unitarians. They argue that everlasting Father is in fact translated. It actually infers or refers to as age, and that the individual will be called the father of this coming age, and therefore more justification for it to be applicable to Hezekiah than Jesus. I mean, in the culture of the Bible, anyone who began anything, is called the father. I mean, there's many passages in Genesis 4:20 in reference to Jabal. He was the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. Jabal was the first inventor of musical instruments. We describe him as the father who plays the harp and the flute. So scripture is not using father in the literal sense, or in the sense of literal father or ancestor. Because if you look at these passages here, both these men were descendants of Cain, and all their descendants died in the flood. But father was used in the cultural understanding of either one who was, the first to do something, or someone who was important in some way. And so because this person will be one to establish the age to come, he's called the kind of, as Unitarians have argued, the father of the coming age. The other point is that the word mighty God, the mighty God, the word is El Gibor. It's interesting that it's not referred to as Almighty God, but just simply Mighty God. And if you look at the readers who are familiar with the Semitic languages, they will know that any person who's acting in God's authority can be referred to as God himself. I mean, Shabir referenced Ezekiel 31:11, where you have a Babylonian king, and the Babylonian king in that instance is described as the El, but it's not translated as that. You see, it's not translated as God in that instance because they take into account the fact that there is a context. And so the context, in fact, illuminates the great truth of this verse, that there's actually no justification for believing that it refers to the Trinity. The opening verse tells us that there's a time there will be no more gloom for those in distress. All war and death will cease. There's no hint. There's absolutely no hint in this particular passage that the child is God. I mean, Jews never had an idea of an incarnation. The Jews of the Old Testament knew nothing of an incarnation. For them, the Messiah was an appointed, consecrated individual. He was taught off as a child, which Yahweh could never be. And this ruler would grow. The government will be on his shoulder. I want to look at some of the passages, and I know I've probably got about 2 minutes left, where other individuals are called God. I mean, Jonathan conceded that in Jeremiah 33:16, Jerusalem is called Lord, the Lord of our righteousness. Moses, for example, is called God. The Lord said unto Moses, I have made thee a God unto Pharaoh. Angels in Psalm 8:6, for you have made him a little lower than the angels. Genesis 33, an altar is called God. The Lord, Jacob erected an altar. He called the altar the Lord God of Israel. Judges are called God. In Exodus 21 and 22, his master shall bring the judges, and they are in fact called God. Isaiah 37, in reference to, for example, Jerusalem coming from a remnant, the survivors of the Mount of Zion, the zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. And I mean, in these instances, you've got individuals, you've got people. Hezekiah, what does Hezekiah mean? Hezekiah literally means the mighty God. Correct me, Samuel Jonathan. Hezekiah means the mighty God. Elisha, God is salvation. Elijah, Yahweh God. Gedaliah, great God. Elihu, God is he. Eliab, God is father. Even Netanyahu, Netanyahu means God gives. Now, none of these individuals are in fact called or viewed as Almighty God, yet they're described as Almighty God. So in a conclusion, and I know time's almost run out, this passage, in my opinion, is in all probability a reference to Hezekiah. And Hezekiah does in fact mean mighty God. Hezekiah enacted sweeping religious reforms. He included a strict mandate for the sole worship of Yahweh. And if you consider the second book of Kings, the second book of Chronicles, Hezekiah is considered a righteous king, and someone that essentially, the prophet Isaiah expounds his message. He formulates a prophetic name for Hezekiah, and Hezekiah is called Wonderful Counselor because this name is a sign which in fact foretells God's design for him. If there was any form of justification that this is a reference to Jesus, then the writers of the New Testament would have seized upon this particular passage, as they've done with a whole host of other passages where, Matthew and some of the other writers referred to those passages and then superimposed them on Christ. And yet Isaiah 9:6 is never referenced by any of the writers of the New Testament. And I think this basically raises a number of questions. So that's my brief conclusion, and I want to thank you for that opportunity to share a few words on this point. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thanks for your presentation. We're going to move into the rebuttals now, which is 10 minutes each, and Jonathan will go first and Shabir will go second. So Jonathan, will hand over to you for your 10-minute rebuttal.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Let me begin with Shabir's statement that I engage in circular reasoning in regard to my prophetic perfect interpretation of Isaiah 9:6. I don't think this is circular reasoning. What I was saying is that the perfect tense of Isaiah 9:6 isn't conclusive. It can be interpreted either direction, and so we're going to need to appeal to other lines of evidence to settle the debate. He mentioned an alternative translation of Isaiah 9:6, which actually is along the lines of the translation or the rendering of the Aramaic Targum, which is an Aramaic paraphrase of the Hebrew Bible. And so the Targum of Jonathan renders Isaiah 9:6 into Aramaic. Quote, the prophet said to the house of David, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is governed, and he has taken the law upon himself to keep it. His name is called from before him who is wonderful in counsel, the mighty God who lives to eternity, the Messiah, whose peace shall be great upon us in his days. So in that translation, Dr. Michael Brown remarks, and I quote, "The problem with this translation, aside from the fact that it is grammatically strained, is that almost all the names are heaped upon God, and only the last two are given to the Son, although it is naming, it's the naming of this royal child that's central to the verse. How odd. Clearly, the names refer to the Son, not to the Lord who gave them. In other words, the Targumic rendering would be like saying, and God, the great, glorious, holy, wonderful, eternal, unchangeable Redeemer and King and Lord, calls his name Joe. There's no precedent or parallel to this anywhere in the Bible, and no logical explanation for this rendering, nor is it even a natural grammatical rendering of the Hebrew. The characteristics of the royal child are central, highlighted here by his names, not the characteristics of the Lord." End quote. Shabir and Yusuf brought up Isaiah 32:21. Now, as an exception to my claim that El Gabor, when used elsewhere, always refers to Yahweh, and as I mentioned before, the expression occurs 3 other times in the Hebrew biblical corpus. In all 3 of those cases, it refers specifically to Yahweh: Deuteronomy 10:17, Jeremiah 32:18, Isaiah 10:21. In regards to the Ezekiel 32:21 text, it says, "The mighty chiefs, Ele Giborim, shall speak of them." Now, as I said, that verse uses the phrase Ele Giborim, which is sometimes claimed or asserted to be the same words used in Isaiah in the same order, but in the plural form and connected in a genitive relation, literally gods of mighty ones. However, the word Ele actually derives from the root Ayil, which can mean a ram or a leader or chief, rather than El. The plural of El is Elohim. What about the translation of Isaiah 9:6 as divine warrior rather than mighty God? So some have pointed out, as Shabir did, that the word Gibor is sometimes used as a noun, meaning a hero or warrior. And thus the phrase El Gabor in Isaiah 9:6 could perhaps mean something like godlike warrior. And on that view, the word El would be taken adjectively rather than as a noun. And there are many examples in the Hebrew Bible of the word El being used with the following noun or adjective. And Alec Mottier, in his commentary on the book of Isaiah, says, and I quote, "With the following adjective, El always retains its full status as a noun." For instance, Exodus 20, verse 5, Deuteronomy 7, verse 9, Deuteronomy 10, verse 17. End quote. He further remarks, and I quote, "If ever El is used adjectively, the phrase is never identical with Isaiah 9:6, and its meaning is never diluted into godlike. Whenever we find a construction identical with Isaiah 9:6, El with a following adjective or noun, El is never adjectival, but is always the ruling noun, more closely defined by the additional word." End quote. Shabir also raised Isaiah 7:14. I actually take Isaiah 7:14 as being primary reference to the Messiah, although it'll take me a little while to unpack that, so I'll skip that for now, but happy to come back to it if he wants to later. He mentioned Hezekiah again being the fulfillment of Isaiah 9:6. As I said earlier, I think there are a number of problems with this particular interpretation. I think that for one thing, Hezekiah's son Manasseh was a wicked and idolatrous king. He reversed his father's reforms, restoring polytheistic worship in the temple of Baal and Asherah. I think that it's very difficult to interpret Hezekiah as having fulfilled Isaiah 9 because he fails in the description of what Isaiah 9 sets for the individual spoken of there to accomplish. What about the multiple authors of Isaiah? So I actually would affirm the unity of the book of Isaiah. I reject the documentary hypothesis in relation to Isaiah, and I would refer viewers to the works of individuals like Gleason Archer or Kenneth Kitchen or Alec Mottier for a further discussion of this topic. Let me just give you a couple of quotes from Hebrew biblical scholars on this particular point. So, for instance, Kenneth Kitchen, who's an Egyptologist, he says, and I quote, The supposed three books of 1 through 39, 40 through 55, and 56 through 66 have often been alleged to show traces of different periods of composition. There can be little doubt of 1 through 39 belonging to the late 8th century, having numerous links with that epoch, but that 40 to 55 is based in Babylon is simply not true. As scholars of various tribes have been compelled to observe, those chapters betray no first-hand knowledge of the metropolis of Babylon, mentioned only 4 times in these chapters and only once actually implying a Hebrew exile, 48-20 contrasted with 9 times in 1 through 39, but belong in the milieu of the Levant, not least Palestine. Briefly, Marduk-apel-iddina II, Merodach-Baladan of Babylon, seemed a good rival to Sennacherib in 704 to 703, and it was apposite for Isaiah of Jerusalem to warn Hezekiah that trifling with Babylon would lead to his people and goods ending up there, Isaiah 39. At that time, nobody could know whether such a threat might come in 10, 20, or 200 years. No timescale was built into it. The actual span of about 150 years is a product of later history, not known to Isaiah or anyone else in the world in 703. In the case of 56 to 66, there is again nothing inconsistent with an origin in 7th, 6th century pre-exilic Judah, and clear hints that fit that place and time. End quote. Gleason Archer, another scholar of the Hebrew Bible, he says, and I quote, "A most decisive objection to a post-exilic date for the composition of Isaiah 2 is to be found in the numerous, or second Isaiah, is to be found in the numerous passages which refer to idolatry as a wide and prevalent evil in Israel. Isaiah 44, 9 through 20 contains a long diatribe against the folly of making graven images for worship, as if this were a major problem in contemporary Judah. This passage cannot be dismissed as a mere challenge to contemporary pagan nations, for there are too many other passages which speak of idolatry being practiced by the author's own countrymen at that time. Compare 57, 4 through 5, against whom do ye sport yourselves, inflaming yourselves with idols under every green tree, slaying the children in the valleys under the cliffs of the rocks." Not only is ritual prostitution he referred to, but also the sacrificing of babies to Molech and Adrimelech, an infamous practice carried out during the reign of Manasseh in the valley of the sons of Hinnom. And again, Isaiah 57, verse 7, "Upon a lofty and high mountain hast thou set thy bed, even thither wentest thou up to offer sacrifice." This is an obvious allusion to worship in the high places, a type of worship which flourished in the pre-exilic period, but never thereafter. Again, 65, verse 2 through 4, "I spread out my hands all the day into a rebellious people, a people that provoke me to my face continually, sacrificing in gardens and burning incense upon bricks, that sit among the graves and lodge in the secret places, that eat swine's flesh, and broth of abominable things is in their vessels." In the very last chapter, we find that idolatry is still being practiced. In Isaiah 66, 17, "They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves to go unto the gardens behind one in the midst, eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse, they shall come to an end together, saith Jehovah." And plainly, these things represent vicious evils and degenerate pagan abominations which were going on at the time the prophet composed these words. Let us carefully consider the implication of this prevalence of idolatry in Judah. The hilly or mountainous terrain referred to completely excludes the possibility of idolatrous worship being carried on in Babylonia, which was a flat alluvial terrain. The types of worship alluded to are precisely those which are described as having been cultivated in the reign of Manasseh. So far as the post-exilic period is concerned, it is agreed by scholars of every persuasion that the returning Jews who resettled Judah from 536 to 450 brought back no idol worship with them. The terrible ordeal of the Babylonian captivity had brought about a complete rejection of graven images on the part of the Jewish remnant. This complete freedom from idolatry in post-exilic Judea is proved beyond all reasonable doubt by the writings of the admittedly post-exilic authors, notably the prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, and the historians Ezra and Nehemiah. End quote. So we can see then that there's actually, I think, a number of problems with the documentary hypothesis in relation to Isaiah. So I'd reject that particular contention. Very finally, in my last 15 seconds, Yusuf mentioned that Isaiah 9:6 is never mentioned in the New Testament. This is true, but Isaiah 9 is alluded to in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 4, verse 12 through 16. And I'll close with that and turn over to Shabir. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So Shabir, we'll move over to yourself for a 10-minute rebuttal.
Sure. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Jonathan. And let me start with some of the things that Yusuf said, because that will be positive. Naturally, we'll be in agreement. But I think Yusuf has made some excellent points that I wish I myself had made. And these are points that were well articulated by Rabbi Tovia Singer. And also, I'm familiar with a scholar from the Toronto area, Rabbi Michael Kobach, who makes similar points. And they have published this in their Outreach Judaism manuals from Rabbi Tovia Singer, Let's Get Biblical, in 2 volumes, and Rabbi Skobach in his Counter Missionary Survival manual. So these are excellent points. I think we need to go over what Yusuf said again and again and register all of those points. And we will see that his points are actually not really answered by our good friends Samuel and Jonathan. So starting with what Samuel said, he spoke about the role of Israel as the son of God, and then Israel's failure, and then David as the son of God, and then, you know, David's failure, this failure of the Davidic lineage to uphold the monarchy, and then Hezekiah also doesn't live up to it. But I think, Samuel, what we need to really face up to is the fact that, you know, for reasons that are not so much dependent on the actions of the individuals alone, but involves foreign powers, the Davidic lineage came to an end. The last king was Zedekiah, and trying to prove from the Old Testament that there is to be a Messiah is a little too late, because actually that line of David was cut off. And then the prophets naturally are trying to make good of this. This is what has happened with predictions, more widely. When people predict that the world is going to come to an end and then it doesn't come to an end, they go into a reinterpretation. So we see the later prophets are reinterpreting what has happened. And they're looking for a Messiah to still come and fulfill what was supposed to be fulfilled. And we see this happening with interpretations regarding Jesus as well. Among the 4 Gospels, you have it that in Luke's Gospel, Jesus is going to be this Davidic king. He will have the government, he will reign, and so on. But then by John's Gospel, he's saying, my kingdom is not of this world. Because what has happened is that as time went by, Christians realized, wait a minute, Jesus did not fulfill that requirement of the Davidic kingdom. If you say that he was to be that one on whose shoulder will be the government, well, he actually never shouldered the government. So now Christians have to say, well, you know what? He's going to come back a second time, and that's when he's going to shoulder the government. That's when he's going to really fulfill Isaiah 9. And our Jewish friends, like David Klinghoffer, for example, in his book, Why the Jews Rejected Jesus, he says, okay, well, when Jesus comes back and he does all that, then we will know that he is the Messiah. But so far, it looks like he didn't fulfill what he was supposed to fulfill. It doesn't look like he qualifies as the Messiah. Moreover, in the New Testament, we have indications that will go against Jesus being the Messiah. For example, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus is given the genealogy which goes back through Jehoiakim. And we know from Jeremiah that that line of descent is never going to have a scion that will sit on David's throne. So this disqualifies Jesus as the Messiah. So there are real problems in trying to take this Isaiah passage to make it refer to Jesus. One of the major problems is what my good friend Yusuf pointed out. If you want to say that he is literally mighty God in Isaiah 9:6, then he is literally everlasting Father as well. If you take it that he's metaphorically everlasting Father, then we're open to taking mighty God as metaphoric as well. And then we're fine. Then Jesus is not God, and there is only one God, the one whom Jesus called his Father in the Gospels, and the one whom Christians call the Lord and Father of the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. But if you say no, he was the mighty God, then you fall into modalism with that one as well, because notice how John chapter 1 verse 1 reads, and scholars who defend the Trinity based on that verse will say, well, it's a good thing that John didn't say that Jesus was God, because if he said Jesus was God, that would mean that Jesus is the Father, and we don't want to make him the Father. So John put it in a nice way, without theos having the definite article there. But if you give him mighty God right here in Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6, then you're back into that modalistic belief, and that is a heresy. But then more so, if you're going to take everlasting Father as literal, well, then you are back into modalism. If you take it metaphorical, well, then let's take mighty God as metaphorical as well, and then we don't have the modalistic problem, and we also do not have Jesus as God, and my conclusion B is upheld, which is that in no way does this actually mean the literal divinity of that one that is spoken about. Actually, it turns out that Jonathan agreed that because this is in the perfect tense, it can be interpreted in either direction, which is something I granted as well. But I take it further by saying, since it's already in the perfect tense, and as Yusuf emphasized, keep it in the perfect tense. Let Christians see that this is in the perfect tense. The Son was born. The Son was called, and so on. Let everybody see that it was in the perfect tense. And then you can explain that, okay, as Christians, we believe that even though it is stated in the perfect tense, a prophet might be using this in a prophetic way. He is using the prophetic perfect to indicate the future. But keep the translation in the perfect, please. And then we will all, I think, be in a better position to realize that, in fact, the deed is done. The child was already born and was already called all of these names. Now, when we realize that the child is called mighty God, what explains that? As John Collins pointed out, this is a remnant of the times. People considered the kings to be gods. This is in Canaanite mythology, as he pointed out, and also in Egyptian mythology. In fact, he and several other commentators have pointed out that whereas Jesus is called, or rather the one in Isaiah 9:6 is called by all of these names, these are similar to the names that were given to the Egyptian kings when they were inaugurated in office. So it's not something new and strange in that environment, but obviously later on, as Gleason Archer pointed out, and Jonathan was just citing him, what we are now calling second Isaiah, and Gleason Archer denies that there is such a categorization. This clearly is, a document that emphasizes monotheism. Isaiah chapters 43 to 46 in particular, and that emphasis on monotheism is different from the earlier chapters of Isaiah, where a king can be called mighty God. And John Collins has pointed to this difference and shown that there is an evolution in belief, but though the scriptures have been edited later on, we still have remnants of that polytheistic context in which the Israelites lived, and the beliefs that they incorporated into their system of thought. So nowadays, both Muslims and Christians and Jews, so all three of these communities, we want to emphasize monotheism, and we want our scriptures to read in a monotheistic light. We want to interpret the Bible in particular with monotheism as at its roots. That is the framework within which we're going to interpret. And when we take that framework to the Old Testament, and in particular to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, we realize that this has to be interpreted in a monotheistic way. And if you take mighty God in a literal way here, then you're back into modalism. If you take the everlasting Father in a literal way, you're into modalism. And I would have liked for Jonathan to comment on Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, because everybody knows now that Alma in 7:14 is a reference to a young woman of marriageable age, perhaps a virgin, perhaps not necessarily a virgin. virgin, and the Emmanuel there is already a child at that time, probably the child of the prophet Isaiah himself, or the child of King Ahaz, and not a futuristic individual to be born 700 years later, not Jesus. But if you say that was that same futuristic individual, well, then you would have either two persons being incarnated, if one from Isaiah 7, another from Isaiah 9. But if you say they are one and the same, then everybody knows the one from Isaiah 7 was already born 700 years before Christ. So I rest my case. This is not about the deity of Israel's Messiah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shabir. We're going to move on to 5 minutes each from Samuel and from Yusuf. So Samuel, we'll start with your 5 minutes. I think, would you like to put up some slides or not?
You're muted, I think, Samuel.
Samuel, you're muted.
Okay, I have no slides.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, Shabir. Lots of ideas there, and Yusuf as well. I'll just pick up a few things here. Yusuf said that this section is not in the LXX. I'm not sure what that means. I've just looked up the LXX and I can see it there. He also mentioned the name of Hezekiah. The name of Hezekiah means God gives strength. So that name in itself doesn't really sound like a name of Hezekiah, a divine type of name. It's just something that God does. I guess a point I wanted to bring up just to help with the debate generally was we've been talking about the past and present and everything. And I think most of us here would know that Semitic, perfect and imperfect aren't that straightforward. It doesn't always mean past, doesn't always mean future. And Jonathan has pointed this out in that if you keep reading in Isaiah, there are other examples of things being spoken about in the past, in the perfect tense, which are still to come. But I just want to actually point out here, because Yusuf accused us of having a deliberate agenda of misinterpreting the Bible, and so really attributing bad motives to Christians. So I want to reply to that. And I'd just like to quote from Bridges' translation of the Quran. This is from Fidel Solomon, and he writes this. And I'm doing this because they're both Semitic languages, Arabic and Hebrew. And I just want to point something out, that this is what happens with translation. He says on page IX in his introduction on Bridges' translation of the 10 Qira'ats, he said, many such Muslims are unaware, for example, that God spoke in the Quran about the hereafter in the past tense around 500 times. So it seems to me that most of the time the Quran speaks about the future hereafter, it's doing it in the past tense, yet when it's translated and understood, it's referring to the future. And so I just put that out there, that English tenses are not like Semitic tenses. They're just different. And we have this not just with the Bible, but with the Quran as well. And so again, now Shabir did bring this up, that this is why we need to read in context and see how it functions, because the tenses can be, as I've just given examples there. Now, I want to make a few comments about the common references to Tovia Singer and to Jewish scholars. I want to say they reject Jesus as the Messiah, of any type of Messiah. I assume that Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And so, you obviously believe that he is the Messiah. And so it is sometimes strange that we see Muslims only listening to Jews who reject Jesus. That seems to not be in the way you want to go. But then at some points, you will reject those Jews. So, for instance, all of the Jews you mentioned would believe that the Messianic line has not been cut off, because the Old Testament scriptures, the end of Kings, the end of Chronicles, all say that the Son survives and that the story continues. That's just the Old Testament. So sometimes you're taking these Jews, other times you're going right against them. They reject Jesus. How do you work this out as as we do this. Now, you're saying that with these Jews, they were saying, well, Jesus didn't fulfill these promises. Well, I'd say that he did. Yes, there is more to come in the second return of Jesus, but that's okay. Again, why would you have a problem with Jesus fulfilling some now and some later, particularly when he's bringing the resurrection kingdom? Let's see. But I just want to finish off on my main point, and nobody's really addressed the main point of what I've said yet, and that is that we cannot do it. God can put forward the ideal priesthood. He can put forward the temple. He can put forward the sacrifice. He can put forward what it means to be the king. And when you read the scriptures, we all fail to do it. So I want to ask my Muslim friends here, are you saying that we can do it? Are you saying that humanity can fulfill its mission and that we can do it? Because the book of Isaiah says again and again, we cannot do it, and God is coming to do it for us. And so that's how I understand the book of Isaiah. And I haven't seen anyone actually engage with the whole of Isaiah yet, because that's what Isaiah is saying. We cannot do it. We cannot be the right king. We cannot be the right Israel. We cannot be the right people. God is going to come and do it for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Yusuf, we're going to move on to your 5 minutes. So I'll hand over to you.
Am I muted?
We can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. All right. Well, thank you for that, Samuel, and thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Shabir, for acknowledging some of my arguments. In relation to the fact that the Greek Septuagint does not contain this passage, I'll send you the interview that I had with Tobias Singer. It was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is what he told me. I was not aware of that. Now, he says that in what he describes as a kind of the critical edition of the Greek Septuagint, that passage is not contained. And so I assume what you're looking at is probably the Brenton's translation of the Septuagint, which may possibly include aspects of this, but they come much particular later. But this is the information that I got directly from him. The one point I want to make quite clear is that the English language makes a clear distinction between God as in Almighty God and God as in a kind of a small God or a godling or whatever you want to call it. But if you look at the Hebrew language, it only has capital letters. So therefore, that distinction between a bigger God and a smaller God cannot be seen in the text itself. And so not surprisingly, you find individuals like James Moffat, for example, Moffat's translation, even Martin Luther translated the phrase as divine hero. And I believe, subject to correction, Edgar Goodspeed as well. They did the same, not as God. You then mentioned, Samuel, about just some of the points that you raised about the fact that the Quran, in fact, uses the future in the past tense, and that is correct. And of course, you can make the same argument for Semitic languages. But what is quite fascinating is that you're using the model of the Quran or the terminology of the Quran, and then attempting to, as I can see it, superimpose that in terms of how you would read these passages in the Old Testament. Now, I grant the point that the present or the past, or could in fact indicate the future. But what you have to have is you have to have the context. And what it seems is that the context appears to be a preconceived theological notion, and then you read that theological notion into the text by justifying that the past present indicates the future, or translating it in the future. When I made the point about the agenda is that the translations are not honest in terms of how it's you can be honest in the translation, but the translations deliberately translated in the future, all of them. And in actual fact, they should be done in the past or the present. And then you can obviously make the argument that this is in fact in references to the future. The issue about the fact that Samuel says, well, Hezekiah does not bring the kingdom of God. But now the point being made, does Jesus in fact bring the kingdom of God? If you look, for example, his march into Jerusalem, where in Matthew's gospel, it says, tell ye the daughters of Zion, behold, the king cometh, sitting upon an ass, and a great multitude spread their garments, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Because he was near to Jerusalem and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. Now, the point being made is that all of that kind of fizzled out because the overthrow of the temple authority was imminent. It was a forerunner to the expulsion of the Jews, but none of that materialized. None of that, in fact, materialized. And Jesus himself, when he was questioned, he says, when they asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom was of this world, then would my servants fight? Then I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence." So where is the kingdom of God that Jesus established? Are we going to say that this refers to the second coming? Well, if it refers to the second coming, then it remains an unfulfilled prophecy. How are you basically going to apply this to Jesus in that instance? Whereas Hezekiah, on the other hand, if you look at Hezekiah's kingdom, it could be declared forever, even though Jonathan made the point that his son Manasseh, there was apostasy under the son Manasseh. But Hezekiah per se, through his efforts, he cleansed the temple ritual of idolatry, which the Bible describes. It describes Israel. Thou, in Ezekiel, thou hast played the whore also with the Assyrians. Thou wast unsatiable, and yet thou playest the harlot, and yet could not be satisfied. The spirit of whoredom has caused the Israelis to err, and they have gone a whoring from under their God. Now, under Hezekiah, the point being made is that the Davidic dynasty was confirmed as the only true kingly rule that God would accept over the people from henceforth. So Hezekiah was a reformer. He cleansed religious worship of foreign influence. He purged the palace, the temple of images and pagan altars. He reestablished the pure monotheistic religion. And in the long run, in conclusion, I understand that my time is off. Hezekiah's achievements would obviously outlive him because it would leave an everlasting, indelible impact on the history of his people. And thus God, through Isaiah, bestows upon Hezekiah this name which honors the king by proclaiming the great things God will do for him and through him for the people of Israel. So I don't see how that could in fact be referring to Jesus. Those are just my short points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thanks for your points there. We're going to move into a time of cross-examination now. And Jonathan and Shabir will each have up to 15 minutes to present their side. So Jonathan will go first. So Jonathan, over to you for up to 15 minutes.
Well, thank you, Shabir, for your presentations this evening. Obviously, as a Muslim, you would believe that Jesus is the Messiah in some sense, because the Quran attests that he is the Messiah, which implies, of course, that there has to be some sort of Christological or messianic expectation in the Hebrew Bible for that concept to have meaning. Would you say, for instance, would you agree with Rashi that Zechariah 9 through 12 is uncontrovertibly a messianic text? Are you muted, Shabir?
Muted.
Here. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Jonathan, for that question. I have no reason from within the Islamic tradition to agree that Isaiah 9:6 is a messianic text. While, of course, I believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Quran does not define what Messiah means. And I'm willing to go with a simple definition that Messiah means someone who is approved by God for some office that God is appointing them towards. So a Messiah could be a prophet, he could be a king, he could be a priest. And we find examples of all of this in the Hebrew Bible. So to say that Jesus is the Messiah, according to Muslim belief, does not get very more specific than that, and it does not require that Jesus be divine, nor does it require that there was a previous prophecy regarding his coming.
So the question actually pertains to Zechariah 9 rather than Isaiah 9. Rashi is a medieval Jewish scholar. He says that Zechariah 9 is incontrovertibly messianic. There is an expectation in the Hebrew Bible of this Davidic heir or descendant who would establish this global peace and justice and dominion, and that his kingdom would be forevermore. Would you agree that there is a messianic expectation in the Hebrew Bible, even if you would contest Isaiah 9:6 as being among those texts?
In answer to that, because you mentioned Will Berger in your presentation, let me see what Will Berger is saying about this. He says on page 409 of his Isaiah 1 to 12, we have already mentioned that the widespread term messianic is problematic as a designation for this present section. There is no place in the Old Testament which speaks of a Messiah as a savior figure who comes forth out of the transcendent regions and brings world history to an end. And he tells us to see Gressman, whom he's already cited previously. So to say that there is a person that is referred to as the Messiah in the Old Testament, this is not so straightforward. Michael Skobac it has said in one of the tapes that I refer to, that's easily found online, that there is no text in the Old Testament that uses the term with the definite article Hamashiach as a reference to a futuristic individual. What he says is that, yes, there is a vision of what you might call a messianic age, and it is to be inferred that you will have a ruler at that time. And in that sense, you can say that is the Messiah, but it's not so explicit in the Old Testament. So I have to confess at the same time that I have not studied Zechariah 9 well enough to be more detailed in my answer regarding that. But perhaps in the future debate, we will have a chance to discuss that in more detail.
Sure. So I would have to disagree with you that there's no reference in the Hebrew Bible or any trace in the Hebrew Bible of an eschatological figure who will be of Davidic descent, who will come and bring in the end of the age. For instance, even sticking with Isaiah, go to Isaiah 11. It speaks about there's the shoot from the stump of Jesse, and it says in verse 4, with righteousness he shall judge the poor, decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. And then it gives us imagery of world peace that is represented by the animals no longer engaging in predation. It says the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and the little child shall lead them, and so forth. And in verse 10 it says, in that day the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. And so he's an individual who's going to bring representatives of the nations to a recognition of the God of Israel, and he's going to bring in an age of world peace. In fact, Isaiah 2 speaks about in that day the nations beating their swords into plowshares and so forth, and their spears into pruning hooks. So would you not agree with that expectation that we find in the Old Testament?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Jonathan. And for a while there, I was wondering if you mixed up the sequence and thought that I was asking a question and you were giving the reply. But nonetheless, I'm glad you fleshed that out like that, because when you think of that, the very passages you quoted show that Jesus did not fulfill this. Now, first of all, the term Hamashiach does not occur in this passage that you're referring to in Isaiah 11, nor does it occur in Isaiah chapter 9, nor in Isaiah chapter 7. And coming back to Isaiah 11, you spoke about the child playing with the asps and, the lions and the lambs lying together. And of course, you didn't mention that the lions will eat grass, but as it says in that passage, when did this all happen? It didn't. If you say that Jesus will come back and fulfill all of this in the future, then we're still waiting for Jesus to be the fulfillment of that, even though Muslims have no hesitation in declaring with the Quran that Jesus is the Messiah of God and the prophet and messenger of God. But to say that he is the Messiah in this sense, that he will bring about a period of peace, where is that period of peace? You say that all of the pruning all of the swords will be turned into agricultural implements. Now we have weapons of mass destruction. Like, where is the peace that was supposed to be heralded in by this Messiah that you are describing? It didn't happen. So really, somehow, I don't see why you're not getting it.
Sure. I mean, of course, as you know, Christians will say that there's two comings, and I think one could make a case from that, both from the Old and the New Testament. But be that as it may. Do you know of any cases in the Hebrew Bible where the singular form of the word El is used in reference to anyone except a deity?
No, I'm not so well, schooled in the Hebrew to have studied the Old Testament from that perspective. But I do know that Elohim is in the plural, and that's used for deity, and Elohim is used for individuals. Exodus chapter 7 declares that Moses will be Elohim to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be his prophet. So, if Elohim can be used for an individual, then I don't see why it would be problematic to think that El has to be an exception to that general picture.
So I've counted 217 cases in the Hebrew Bible where the word El in singular form appears, and when used in the singular form as opposed to the plural form, it never refers to anyone except a deity. There are a few cases where it refers to a pagan deity, but it always refers to a deity. And so if El Gabor in Isaiah 9 were referring to someone except a deity, that would have to be the sole exception. And indeed, there are three other occasions where El Gabor appears, and it always refers to Yahweh. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I would wonder if this is not circumstantial. Like, happily, you found that El in the singular never refers to an individual, but you're ignoring all those times when Elohim, which clearly refers to God, is used in reference to other individuals. So you have to explain why it is permitted to use Elohim, which really literally means gods. Why it is permissible to use the word gods for human individuals, but in your theology, it seems that it is not permissible to use the singular for other individuals other than the true deity. And so it looks like you are picking and choosing, and just coincidentally, you found that El was not used for anyone else. And as for your saying that El in El Gibor, the plural form in Ezekiel chapter, as I cited previously, it comes not from El but from the word for ram. I cannot contest you on that because I do need to learn more Hebrew. I acknowledge that. But I have listened to both Rabbi Tovia Singer and Michael Skovak elucidating this, and they're convinced that this is El in the plural, Elim. And of course the meme is dropped at the end, and that's how you have Eli Giborim. And they're rabbis, and as Rabbi Singer points out, they have been learning the language from childhood. So I doubt that they would have missed that point. But of course, they're not gods, and maybe you're onto something, and I will be studying that to find out what is the real origin of this word.
Sure, I have consulted Hebrew scholars on this. I've also looked at Logos Bible software, which allows you to check the roots of words, and I was able to confirm it that way also. So I can cite sources, and when I publish my essay on this, I'll cite sources on that. In relation, going back to Isaiah 9:6, so the word, the expression El Gabor, of course, is not found in isolation, but also it's combined with other expressions, including Wonderful Counselor and Father of Eternity. I think that's the best translation there, because Father stands in genitive relation to everlasting. So Father of Eternity, I think, is the best translation there. It's very difficult to conceive of Father of Eternity being used of a non-divine figure. And when you take it together with El Gabor, it seems that you have a very, very robust argument. What would you say in relation to the combination of those expressions?
Well, if you have to take them on, I mean, it seems that if you insist on taking them all literally, so that mighty God has to be taken literally, then you have to insist on taking everlasting Father literally as well. Now, you're saying Father of Eternity, and perhaps you're onto something there as well. Again, my Hebrew fails me, but if I think of the translation everlasting Father, which is quite common, then if we think of Jesus as the Father, then either we take it figuratively, in which case a prophet like Jesus in a Muslim context can mean that he cares for his people. He's like a father to his people. So that's metaphorical. But if you take it in an ontological sense, that he is the father, then we have the problem of modalism, as Yusuf has pointed out, and I also emphasized.
Yeah, I mean, that would be anachronistic. I think that the book of Isaiah, as well as elsewhere in the Bible, uses it speaks of God as a father to his people Israel, and indeed even in messianic texts like Isaiah 53 speaks about he shall see his seed or see his offspring, which would entail some sort of father relationship in some sense. So I don't really see that as being a significant problem. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that in Isaiah 53, you're talking about seed, you're talking about literal descendants. And so it seems that we're talking about a human type individual who will have literal descendants, that his days will be prolonged. He wouldn't die because he would be made to live longer, to the extent that some commentators think that this is a reference to Hezekiah as well, which fits in well with my presentation showing that Hezekiah is central to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapters 36 to 39 really focuses on Hezekiah. That's the history, that's the context. And in Isaiah 53, we're talking about somebody whose days have been prolonged after some suffering. And Isaiah 38 shows Hezekiah to have had that happen to him. He was about to die, but he prayed, and God gave him a promise that God will prolong his life, and added another 15 years to his life so that he did live on to see his offspring, although, of course, Manasseh was not the kind of offspring that he would have been happy to see, as you pointed out. But nonetheless, we're talking here in Isaiah 53 about one who is a servant of God, which is very different from the mighty God of Isaiah 9:6, if we take mighty God literally. And the only way out of this is to take it figuratively, and take everlasting Father also figuratively, and put them all together and realize that Isaiah, on the whole, is talking about there being only one God, as is emphasized in Isaiah's chapters 43 to 46, and to start speaking about this other figure being God, or calling him mighty God, you are ending up now towards the direction of the Trinity, which itself has been questioned by some Christians as going away from monotheism and away from Isaiah chapters 43 to 46.
Okay. In relation to the word zero, you're aware that the word is used in an allegorical sense elsewhere in Isaiah, like you seed of evildoers at 1:4, seed of an adulterer in 14:20, seed of falsehood in 57:3-4. So it can be used in an allegorical, non-literal sense, the word zero or seed.
Yeah, so when it can be used both allegorically and literally, and I'm sure you know that when a word is used allegorically or metaphorically, its origin really is literal. There is a literal meaning, and then we stretch that meaning to incorporate a metaphorical or allegorical sense. So if it can mean literally, then you have to have a good reason for taking it metaphorically. And in the Isaiah 53 passage, since we're talking about a person who is described as the servant of God, who goes through suffering, and then God prolongs his days so that he can see his seed, this looks to be all literal. And you must have a reason for making it metaphorical. But if your reason is Christological, like you start with Jesus being God and who suffers and dies for the sins of the world, and then you go back to impose that interpretation onto the Old Testament, well, this is circular reasoning. But if you're just looking at the Old Testament as it is, and you're looking at the book of Isaiah in particular, and seeing his emphasis on the oneness of God in the chapters just preceding this one, then don't read Isaiah 53 in a way that will start diluting that oneness of God.
Okay, I think it's your turn.
Okay. So
over to you, Shabir, for 15 minutes cross-examination.
Okay. Just a minute. I just want to get ready here. Okay. Oh, yes, Jonathan. So nice to be able to pick your brains on a few things, because you know the Hebrew, and you know your text better than I will, because I spend my time trying to learn the Quran, And I'm sure that as I'm devoted to the Quran, you're devoted to the Bible. Naturally, you're going to know the Bible more than I do. Plus, I recognize your scholarship. I respect the fact that you are trained and you have your doctorate in something related to biology, I know. And so I'm looking forward to more dialogue with you and to continue learning from you and from Samuel as well. Samuel, I often listen to you with great admiration, and I want to continue this dialogue. So you mentioned that Isaiah 11, Jonathan, is depicting the same individual as Isaiah 9, but you didn't say anything about the individual of Isaiah 7. Is that the same individual we're talking about?
Yes, I would believe so. Do you want me to elaborate, or do you have further follow-up?
No, it's fine. I got you. So if that's the same individual, now we know that and as I said, almost I exaggerated a little bit when I said everybody knows, because that's an absolute, not everybody knows, not everybody will agree even. But you are aware that many will argue that the term Alma in Isaiah 7:14 refers to a young woman of marriageable age, not necessarily a virgin. And this has been confirmed by Hans Wildberger as well. And I see that you've been reading Hans, Dr. Wildberger. So if that was about a figure that was already born at that time, that's over and done with. And now we're talking about a futuristic figure to be born who will be called Mighty God. Aren't we talking about two different persons here? One called Emmanuel, the other one called Mighty God?
No, so I think they're one and the same figure. So at this point, I'll need to elaborate on why I think that. So in relation to, first of all, you mentioned the word Alma quite rightly, and how it's often claimed by Hebrew scholars to not refer to a virgin, but simply to a young woman, even though the Greek Septuagint translates it as virgin. Now, I'd refer you there to Alec Mottier, and others have also documented the same thing. Alec Mottier comments on this, saying of the 9 occurrences of Alma, those in First Chronicles 15:20 and the title of Psalm 46 are presumably a musical direction, but no longer understood. In Psalm 68:25, Proverbs 30 verse 19, and Song of Solomon 1:3, the context throws no decisive light on the meaning of the word. In Genesis 24:43 and Exodus 2:8, the reference is unquestionably to an unmarried girl. And in Song of Solomon 6 verse 8, the alamot is contrasted with queens and concubines, are unmarried and virgin. Thus, whenever the context allows a judgment, Alma is not a general term meaning young woman, but a specific one meaning virgin. It is worth noting that outside the Bible, so far as may be ascertained, Alma was never used of a married woman. So that's Alec Mottier, and other commentators have also written along similar lines. Now, in relation to interpreting what's going on in Isaiah 7:14, we have to look at the context of Isaiah 7. And as you know, in Isaiah 7, you have this concern from Ahaz that the nation of Assyria, which is coming against Judah and Ephraim has or the northern kingdom of Judah has formed an anti-Assyrian coalition with the king of Syria, and they have asked Ahaz to join them in that anti-Assyrian coalition. And he's declined, and they are basically now threatening to come after him as well, to come after Ahaz and establish another alternative king on the throne. And so there's this concern about the continuity of the Davidic dynasty, and therefore the messianic hope, which rests in the continuity of the Davidic dynasty. And so there's and so God promises deliverance to King Ahaz through Isaiah. He tells Isaiah to go and bring Shear-Jashub, his son, to meet with Ahaz, and he's told, "It shall not stand. Thus says the Lord God: It shall not stand. It shall not come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus. The head of Damascus is Rezin. And within 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered from being a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all." So this promise is conditional upon Ahaz's faith. And then God speaks to Ahaz, saying, "Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or high as heaven." And Ahaz says, "I will not ask God. I will not put the Lord to the test." So he feigns humility, and God gets angry And he says, "Hear then, O house of David, is it too little a thing to weary men that you weary my God also?" And actually, the yous here actually shift from the singular to the plural in the Hebrew. This is invisible in the English. In the Hebrew, it shifts from singular to plural. He's actually addressing the whole household of David. "Hear then, O house of David." The reference is shifted. And it says in verse 14, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold," speaking to the house of David, "give the house of David a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel," of course, meaning God with us. "He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good." In other words, he will be born into the poverty of his people. And then verse 16 says, "For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted." Now, I would understand the boy reference in verse 16 to actually be Shear-Jashub, Isaiah's son, whom he had brought with him to visit King Ahaz. And actually, if you read the text carefully, we find out that if you move into chapter 8, that instead of getting the blessing Emmanuel child, he gets another child instead, who's actually born to the prophetess called Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz. And of course, Alma, whether you think it refers to a virgin or not, does refer to an unmarried woman of marriageable age. So Isaiah's wife would be excluded there. And Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz is a judgment child, not a blessing child. And so I'd actually argue that the promise gets deferred because of Ahaz's unbelief. And actually, so I would link Isaiah 9:6 with the Isaiah 7:14 promise.
Yeah. So, okay, Jonathan, I'm so sorry that, you lost me a little bit there. So, okay, so we have Shear-Jashub, who is the son of the prophet Isaiah. And later on, Isaiah has another son with his wife, and that son is named Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz. That's in Isaiah chapter 8. So these are the two sons. Now, Isaiah comes with the one son, you're saying, to the king Ahaz, and then tells the king Ahaz, this is going to be the sign. The young woman is, let me use that translation for the moment. The young woman is going to conceive, or probably has already conceived, and will bear a son, and will name him Emmanuel. So and then later on it says, when that child grows. So now you're saying that child which is mentioned now, who has to grow up enough to know the difference between good and evil, that is Shear-Jashub.
Right. In verse 16, I think the reference is to Shear-Jashub, correct.
And what makes you make that connection, jumping the Emmanuel? Because you were talking about a son who is not necessarily a child, Shear-Jashub, because he came with his father, as opposed to his father carrying him as a toddler. And because the child who has to grow up in verse 16 has to grow up to be about 2 years old. So if you're talking about a child that Isaiah brought with him into Ahaz's palace, there must have been some description. If this child was less than 2 years old, there must have been some description to indicate that. On the surface, one would imagine that this boy walked in with his father. And why should I call him boy? He could have been a fully grown man, for all we know. So to try to pin the age of that boy, of that Shear-Jashub, I'm saying boy, but to that son, to pin his age to make him less than 2 years old, you have to have some evidence other than your desire to not make the Emmanuel one who has to grow up to learn the difference between good and evil. Do you have any such evidence?
So first of all, I would argue that Shear-Jashub, so he's only mentioned by name that one time in the narrative, and so one wonders, why is Isaiah asked to bring his son Shear-Jashub to see Ahaz? It makes sense if he actually plays a role later in the narrative. Otherwise, it makes no sense. But my motivation for this proposal is, which is something which it's not just me that's offering this. This is something that's discussed in academic commentaries as well. Alec Mottier, for one, takes this is a messianic text. Is that I think I'm persuaded on independent grounds that Isaiah 7 and Isaiah 9 are dealing with the same individual, and I'm persuaded that Isaiah 9 is a messianic text, and I'm also persuaded that Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz is not the same individual as the Emmanuel child, and actually the Emmanuel child gets deferred because of Ahaz's disbelief, and so it's an inference based on those considerations.
Okay, I want to ask you about Alma as again, because I know you explained in detail, but I want to get the gist. So, are you saying that it is possible that Alma could mean either a virgin or a non-virgin, but a young woman of marriageable age?
So I think that a virgin is a legitimate translation of Alma, correct?
Okay. Do you think that a young woman of marriageable age is also a legitimate translation with no comment on her virginal status?
With the qualification of unmarried.
Unmarried. Okay. So, in other words, Alma could refer to an unmarried young woman without any knowledge of whether or not her virginal status has been maintained.
It certainly means unmarried. I think most would agree on that. Whether it refers to virginal status as an item of debate, I think that one can adduce arguments to that effect, but most scholars wouldn't agree, correct?
So, because your answer is a little bit indirect, I still want to get more clarity on this. So, let's say we look at a young woman. She's not been married. Like, how do we know she's a virgin or not a virgin? If we take virgin to mean that she has not had a previous sexual experience. I'm sorry to be so graphic, but I want to understand this. So, if the prophet there is referring to a young woman, is he referring to a young woman with the presumption that this woman has not been married and she's presumed to have not had a previous sexual experience?
Right. As I said, I think that virgin is a legitimate translation of this text. And indeed, it seems that the author of the Septuagint, or the translator of the Septuagint, or translators of the Septuagint, also took that view. As I said earlier, the texts where we can actually discern what the meaning is are quite consistent with virgin being an appropriate translation of Alma.
Mm-hmm. And so, of course, it's rendered in the Septuagint. But those modern translations that render it here as young woman, are you saying they're wrong to do that? Because a young woman could also be a virgin. But by saying young woman, we're not saying we have knowledge of her previous sexual experience or lack of it.
I'm not saying they're wrong. As I said, it's an item of scholarly debate. I think that it's there's limited data on it. I think that you can adduce arguments to the fact that virgin is legitimate translation, as I said, but I wouldn't be particularly dogmatic on it.
Okay, sure. Thanks. I appreciate your answer. Now, since we were speaking about the Septuagint, I want to refer to something that Yusuf brought up, that the Septuagint does not, in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, at least the way I can see it, does not call Jesus by this controversial title that it was the subject of a lot of our debate here, Mighty God, or even Everlasting Father. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, so the Septuagint... the Septuagint translation, as Yusuf correctly or noted, or somewhat correctly noted, doesn't use doesn't ascribe the fourfold title to the figure. So Isaiah 9:6, contrary to what Yusuf said, is actually present there in the Septuagint, but the text says, because, I'm quoting from the Septuagint, because a child was born to us, a son was given to us, whose leadership came upon his shoulder, and his name is called Messenger of the Great Council, or Angel of the Great Council, for I will bring peace upon the rulers and health to him. So I think that's what Yusuf was getting at, that although the Isaiah 9:6 is there, it doesn't attribute the fourfold title to this figure. Did you have a particular question on that?
No, I just wanted to get clarity on that, because Yusuf was a little bit uncertain, and that left me a little uncertain as well. And I know that Samuel tried to respond by saying the verse is there, but I think the key point is that the controversial titles between Muslims and Christians, the titles here, Everlasting Father and Mighty God, and that is absent from the Septuagint. So how do we account for the Septuagint omitting these important titles if you insist that Isaiah 9:6 was and is a reference to a futuristic figure, and that's one of the few texts which I know of only one other, Psalm 45, that speaks of the king as God. How do you account for that omission?
I don't have an explanation for why they translated it the way they did. We find Isaiah 9:6 as it stands in our Bibles in both the Masoretic text as well as in the Dead Sea Scrolls. As for why the translator of the Septuagint chose to render it angel of great counsel, I'm not sure. There might be a connection between the phrase wonderful and the angel of the Lord in Judges 13 and Genesis 32, or just Judges 13. He's called Pele, or he says, why do you ask for my name? It is wonderful. And it may be that there was a link between the angel of the Lord and that expression wonderful, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I thought that was all the time I had, Dave, because I was timing myself and yeah.
That's correct, Shabir. We've just finished up your 15 minutes. So thank you, Shabir. Thank you, Jonathan, for that time of cross-examination. We're going to start to conclude our time together. And so we're going to move into final statements now, of which Samuel will go first, and then Yusuf will go second, and you will each have 3 minutes. So Samuel, I'm going to hand over to you for your final statement.
You're muted.
Samuel, you're muted.
I want to thank Shabir and Yusuf for this opportunity to meet again and talk about these things. And thank you, Dave, for hosting and leading us through it. And for Jonathan for working with me as we've tried to come at this from two different angles. I'll just restate my argument again and encourage people to follow that through. And that is that God has given us a mission as humanity to bring him glory. We have failed to do this. He's made the nation of Israel to be his priestly nation in this world. They have failed to live that way, and we see this demonstrated over and over again in the Old Testament. Part of this was that God had the son of David. Sometimes he's called the Messiah, sometimes he's not called the Messiah, but he's the Davidic son who will establish God's kingdom on earth. As we read through the prophets, we see that humanity fails to do this. The sons of David failed to do it. In fact, Hezekiah is shown in the book of Isaiah, chapters 36 to 39, to not be the fulfillment of Isaiah 9, because it ends with him, in a sense, happy that he will have peace in his time, but the kingdom's going to be destroyed after him, which is hardly a true and godly attitude. You know, he's not the one fulfilling the everlasting kingdom of Isaiah 9. And so what we see is that the prophets then in Isaiah says repeatedly that God looked and there was no one who could fulfill his plan and purpose. And this is spoken of at least 4 times. I've given you references that no one can do it. And so God himself is going to do it. And so the prophecy of Isaiah 9, whether it's of Hezekiah at that time or someone in the future, it only is fulfilled when God comes and does it himself. And that's just how Isaiah presents it. Prepare the way for the Lord. Make every mountain cut down the mountains, fill up the valleys. God is coming to bring glory to his name. God is coming to do it himself. It says it 4 times over that God is going to do it. And that's how I understand Isaiah 9 talking about the divinity of the Messiah, because it is God himself who is the only one who can fulfill that messianic role. I'll finish up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Over to yourself, Yusuf, for your 3 minutes.
Well, thank you to all you fine gentlemen, and Dave, you're as good and kind as your father is, so thank you for moderating the session. I think the point at the end of the day, I just want to restate my points as well. Samuel asked the question, who are we as humanity? And he says we are all in the image of God. And I mean, that in itself refutes the idea that you can, in fact, attribute divinity per se in a literal sense to individuals. He says we cannot do it. God has to come somehow or the other, and I believe incarnate and do it in the world. But we can do it. And even according to the Christian scriptural understanding, Ezekiel 18:20, the soul that sins, it shall die. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither shall the father bear the iniquity of the son. But the way to salvation is that if the wicked will turn from all the evil that he hath done and do that which is lawful and right, he shall surely live. You shall not die. And that's the whole point. Except your righteousness exceeds the righteousness described in the Pharisees, you shall by no means enter the kingdom of heaven, the path to salvation. I think we established the point that the words are Yeled, Yulad, was born in the past tense. Wayikra should be was called. And so in an effort to portray Isaiah 9:6 as a future prophecy, most of the Bibles translated in the future tense. I mean, you can view it as a future prophecy, but why mistranslate it in the future tense? Jonathan made the point, and maybe, I don't know, I misunderstood. He said nobody's described singularly as El. But the clear example is that if you look, for example, at Ezekiel 31:11, I don't know if Shabir alluded to that, where the earthly ruler, the Babylonian king, is described as Beyad El Goyim, into the hands of El, the mighty one of the nations, the Goyim. Now, the Trinitarian bias of most translators can be seen, because if you compare Isaiah 9:6, where it is translated as El, God, with Ezekiel 31:11, El in that instance is the ruler, the mighty one. So if calling the Messiah, by extension Jesus, El, made him God, then the Babylonian king would also be God. And so the point being made is that let's maintain this level of consistency. Isaiah, speaking of Hezekiah, calling him a mighty ruler, the phrase translated mighty God in the NIV is El Gibor, and the fulfillment of the above stated declarations is foretold after the Assyrian defeat. Hezekiah's glory increased, peace reigned for the rest of his life, and his kingdom is in that sense declared to be forever, because by the efforts of Hezekiah, the only true kingly rule that God would accept over his people from henceforth and forever. And he was, in fact, a reformer. I want to end with one passage, and that is from the Quran, which refers to the whole notion of the divinity of Christ, where Allah says, وَإِذْ قَالَ اللَّهُ يَا عِيسَى ابْنَ مَرْيَمَ أَنْتَ قُلْتَ لِلنَّاسِ اتَّخِذُونِي وَأُمِّي إِلَٰهَيْنَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ, that Allah will say, "O Jesus, the son of Mary, did you say, to the people, take me and my mother as gods besides God?" And he will say, "Glory be to you. It does not behove me to say what it had no right to say. Had I said such a thing, thou wouldst have known it. You know all that is in my heart, but I know not what is in thyself, and you have full knowledge of all that is unseen." So in a nutshell, from this, and again from the books of Isaiah, and indeed exegesis of the Old Testament, we can see that you have to stretch the verse to an extreme version to come to the conclusion that our good Christian friends would like to reach. And I want to thank all of you once again for this enlightening discussion. I learned so much from this interaction. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Yusuf. We're going to move into the closing statements from Jonathan and Shabir. So we'll start with Jonathan for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for participation in today's debate. I'll just start with addressing Yusuf's point that he made in relation to Ezekiel 32, verse 11 and 12, which says, "For thus says the Lord God, the sword of the king of Babylon shall come upon you. I will cause your multitude to fall by the sword of mighty ones, all of them most ruthless of nations." It only uses the Hebrew word gibarim, or mighty ones, in the plural there. It doesn't use the word El at all. So that I think is a false or a faulty argument to use. So I think we've seen this evening that Isaiah 9:6, it uses a fourfold title, a fourfold designation that's applied to this individual of whom Isaiah speaks. "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the garment shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor," a title that's used of Yahweh in Isaiah 28:29. El Gabor, which is a title used in the very next chapter in Isaiah 10, verse 21, incontrovertibly of Yahweh, is used further 2 times of Yahweh as well, never used of anyone besides Yahweh. And indeed, El is El, when used in the singular form, is only ever used of a deity, whether that be Yahweh or a pagan deity, but nonetheless a deity. The title Everlasting Father, I argued, was best translated Father of Eternity. And either way you translate it, I think that it has divine connotations. I think it's very difficult to understand someone as being identified as Father of Eternity and not himself be a divine figure. And so I would like to ask the audience and our Muslim friends, how could Isaiah have made it any more clear for us that he's talking here about a divine human figure? Indeed, I think that the figure in Emmanuel, the figure of Emmanuel in Isaiah 7, as I alluded to earlier, is himself a divine person who is the same child as that described in Isaiah 9. In fact, in Isaiah 8, it speaks about in Isaiah 8, it speaks with a possessive expression, your land, O Emmanuel, which suggests that Emmanuel may well be more than a theophoric name, like Daniel or Ezekiel, but actually might denote deity. And that's indeed the way that the New Testament authors took that text. In fact, Matthew opens up his gospel with quoting from Isaiah 7:14, his name shall be Emmanuel, which means God with us. And it closes with the Great Commission, where Jesus says, I will be with you always to the end of the age. And so you have these bookends of Matthew's gospel, where which indicates to us that, in fact, Jesus is understood by Matthew to be Emmanuel, or God with us, from that text. I showed how Isaiah 9 is dealing with the same figure that we read of in Isaiah 11 and 42 and 49 and 53, who is a figure who's supposed to establish this global peace and establish world justice. Yes, that hasn't been ushered in hitherto, but we understand as Christians that there are two comings of the Messiah. And I think that's a very plausible understanding of the Hebrew Bible. In fact, if one is an Orthodox Jew and takes the Old Testament to be a reliable account of Jewish history, then we read prophecies concerning the restoration from exile. For instance, in Jeremiah, where the temple was to be restored and the Jewish people were to return en masse to worship of God and so forth, and there would be the revealing of the Messiah, and a new era of righteousness would be ushered in. And yet that was partially fulfilled, yes, in the return from exile, but it awaited a complete fulfillment. And so Jews understand this the restoration from exile and the rebuilding of the temple to be the down payment of what was to be the later fulfillment that was to later be realized. And I think that if Orthodox Jews are allowed to do that when they interpret their scriptures, then they should allow us the same ability to be able to interpret the Messiah as having two comings. Yes, the first coming was the down payment, and the rest of what the Messiah was supposed to accomplish will be brought to its fullest fruition in the return of Christ at the end of the age. And so I will close with that, and thank you once again for this stimulating discussion, and I bid you all a great rest of your day or night, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, Jonathan. We're going to move to Shabir's closing statement of 5 minutes. Over to you, Shabir. Shabir, you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Dave. And I want to second what Yusuf said when he praised you for the cordial way in which you have managed this whole discussion. I really appreciate that. And I want to thank our fellow dialogue participants as well, Jonathan and Samuel. You've all been excellent in dialogue. You're scholars and gentlemen. I appreciate that. I pray that God will help us to continue to dialogue like this, to learn from each other, and I pray that he will guide us to that truth that he wants us all to accept for our eternal salvation. Coming back to the points which have proved most important to me in this dialogue, I have presented two possible scenarios. Either we take the passages in a Christological reading, and I said that would be circular, or we go with grammatical, historical analysis. And when we analyze the grammar, we see that it is possible that Isaiah 9:6 can be read to mean that it is God who is the mighty God and everlasting Father who is naming the child Prince of Peace. I think Jonathan has actually accepted that that's a possibility grammatically, even though he cited Michael Brown to reject that in actuality. But when we start with the grammar, this is one point in favor of thinking that this is not a reference to the deity of the Messiah. when we look at the historical perspective, I've shown with maps and charts what was happening at the time of Isaiah. Isaiah is concerned with history and especially what's happening in the life of Hezekiah. And I've shown good reasons for thinking that this is a prophecy about what is happening there and then, regardless whether Hezekiah is the actual king spoken of. But nonetheless, I've cited source after source to show that this was a present reality. It is something that's going to be done there and then. It's not something that's going to await fulfillment 700 years later. But what I've shown as well is that the promise to David that there will always be somebody on his throne, and this will be a continuing dynasty forever. And this failed when the Babylonians came and sacked Jerusalem and took away the people of Judah into exile. And then the prophets are trying to reinterpret what happened, and they're still emphasizing that expectation in a different way. So that's why Jonathan could cite prophet after prophet in the Old Testament who are giving more further information about what will happen, and this will still happen, and so on. And this is why Samuel can say that eventually the prophets are saying God Himself will come. So we get to the last book of the Old Testament, and there is an expectation of what is going to happen. But that's an expectation after the fact, after the failure of the first prophecy. And now when it comes to Jesus to fulfill all of these, we heard many times, okay, Hezekiah didn't fulfill it because Hezekiah's government was not eternal. It didn't last forever. But what is omitted is that Jesus's government did not even start. And Jonathan says, but there was an expectation that there will be two comings. But when we read the New Testament, we see that there was no such expectation. In Acts of the Apostles, the disciples are saying to Jesus, we thought you were going to establish the kingdom of Israel. And, then there is a mention that is going to happen in the future. So what is happening here as well is, again, failed expectation and then future promise. So it's happening. It's a repeated pattern. Promise to David, you will always have a descendant on the throne. Didn't happen. The descendants stopped with the Babylonian exile. Now there's an expectation again. And then Jesus comes and the Christians are saying, okay, but he fulfilled. He was the expected one, but then he didn't do what was expected. The children did not play with the asps, and the lions did not lay with the sheep, and the lions did not start eating grass yet. And so there is another promise. Okay, Jesus will come in the future, and 2,000 years later, we're still waiting for that promise to be fulfilled. So it seems that in the end, it is better to take both the Emmanuel prophecy in Isaiah 7 and the one about who is called everlasting Father in Isaiah 9 to refer to human individuals, not to a futuristic Messiah, and definitely not to a divine being. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Shabir. And really would like to take this opportunity just to thank each of our speakers today. So thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Shabir. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Yusuf, for all your preparation and for engaging on this important topic. We're looking forward to future dialogue in the future. And also thank you to anyone and everyone who has joined us online. It's been great to have you, and we hope these have been great discussions for you too. And I just want to end off by thanking everyone and wishing you all a good day further, or a good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and good morning to you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're entering early morning in South Africa. Dave is in Australia, by the way, Dr. Shabir.
Okay.
I'm the only one in South Africa.
Then good day.
Okay. Good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Right. Assalamu alaikum. Peace.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good to see you all, and good to be here with
Samuel,
dialogue with you.
Jonathan,
Thank you,
Dave,
Yusuf.
Dr. Shabir. Salam. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.
Okay,
Thanks,
Samuel, all the best. Hope we meet again soon.
Yeah, thank you.